My name is Greg Johnson. I'm the Chief of Plan Formulation in Omaha. A little bit more about myself since I didn't really introduce myself. My background is hydraulic engineering. I worked in floodplain management, hydraulic design for a good portion of my career. Then I went back to planning and was a plan formulator project manager for 10 or 12 years, and now I'm the supervisor of that group, so I have a group of project managers that work for me. And one of the things that my office does is we conduct these types of studies, both planning assistance and state studies, but also feasibility studies to justify future federal projects for the Corps of Engineers. This study, Planning Assistance to States, again, is a federal program that Congress hands to us. It's for technical assistance to work with kind of local communities, local governments, tribes, state governments, nonprofits, to work on addressing water resources needs that are at the local level, help them develop solutions to those. And the nice thing about the program is that we can plan those solution sets around whatever is important to those communities. We don't have to plan them to meet federal feasibility justification criteria. So we do projects that might be water resources related from flood risk management, they might be recreation, might be water quality, might be groundwater issues, might be recreation master planning or floodplain mapping. We've done a lot of floodplain mapping and flood risk management assessments for both structural and non-structural plans. And then, so like for this project, we kind of see this study as kind of the springboard to kind of work collaboratively with all of the, the MSAC and all of the partners on kind of what's the framework around which we would try to develop a plan for managing sedimentation at Lewis and Clark, and then that framework might fit into things like Section 1179, or it might require us to work with our congressional partners to develop additional language that gives some additional tools so that the federal government can actually help participate in implementation of that plan. So that's kind of where we see this going, if that makes sense to folks. It's a very flexible program from a funding standpoint because it's appropriated nationally. So Congress gives the Corps of Engineers anywhere from about 5 to 7 million annually in the Section 22 Planning Assistance to States program. And then all of the studies that are conducted under that program are cost shared 50% federal, 50% non-federal with a partner. So it leverages about $12 million worth of work nationally each year. And so we do projects that might be, in Omaha, we do projects that might be 10 or 20,000, and we do projects that are multi-million. We did a floodplain mapping study in Iowa, working with Iowa Flood Center, where we mapped 2/3 of all the watersheds in the state of Iowa for floodplain mapping, updated floodplain mapping. It was about close to a $3 million study. It took us about 10 years to do it. But so it's kind of all over the map in terms of size of study, complexity of study. But the nice thing is we can frame this the way we do the study for whatever works best for the local partner. And then because it's a cost shared project, the way, like my philosophy with my team is everything that we do that's it's a partnership. It's not core driven. Like Tim said, this is us all in this together, working for something that produces sustainability into the future for the reservoir, for the residents around the reservoir, for the infrastructure that's been built around the reservoir, into the future. So that's kind of where we see this thing going. And so with that, I'd entertain any questions, but otherwise I'm here all day, so we can talk to anytime.
Okay, so we'll continue. So my name is Tim Good. So where we are right now, in the current status of where what we've done is we've had the kickoff meeting that was a couple months ago, if I remember correctly, when we came up here. We're it's the ongoing process of assembling the information, identifying the data gaps. Today is where we're doing the scoping workshop, developing the project management schedule and activities. That's all ongoing. I'm constantly reviewing the PMP, talking to Paul where we're headed with this. This will give us a lot more information to finalize the next project management plan or to amend it, which will include phases 2 and 3. So that's what we're going to do today. But I want to turn this over to Paul so he can explain from an engineering perspective of how he's envisioning this whole study before we move into the next one. So if you don't mind, Paul?
Yep. And I'll start a little bit by adding to what Greg said earlier about the programs and authorities. I know just in passing there very quickly, Section 1179A of WRDA 2016 got brought up. So for those of you who don't know the history of that, there was a Section 1179A authorization added in WRDA 2016, which calls for the development of sediment management plans in the upper Missouri River Basin. Admittedly caught some of us by surprise until somebody called and said, "What's with the sediment management plan thing?" And I said, "What?" To the best of our understanding, Senator Barrasso is interested in some management actions in Wyoming reservoirs and was one of the driving forces to get that put in there. Over the course of 2016 and into 2017, the Corps of Engineers Headquarters developed implementation guidance. Okay, our agency reads what Congress put in the paper in that authorization and tries to interpret and put guidelines together about the best way to implement that and how to apply that authorization. That implementation guidance came out in the fall of 2017, roughly 18 months ago or so. In that, we laid out some objectives, some goals of what those plans should encompass and what they should end up being when they are completed. In discussions with the Corps of Engineers Headquarters, the ASA, who's the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, their office determined that a Section 1179, a sediment management plan project would be what they term a new start. New start means, it's a completely brand new project that we have to identify funding for and resources and move forward for. Unfortunately, new starts are about as rare as hen's teeth in some years. And when we had this discussion in the fall of 17, we were already starting on the 2020-2021 budget cycle. So as you can guess, if we get in line for a new start there, if approved, which wasn't a guarantee, we were looking at 2021 to get moving on this effort. That brought up the idea, credit, Brad Thompson for saying, this seems to fit perfectly with Section 22, and actually there are less restrictions, as Greg pointed out. We're even more flexible in Section 22. The one difference between the two authorizations is that Section 1179A does have a construction authorization, okay? Which means that if we go through this study and we identify a project and the project is feasible and the economics shake out, then you can move to construct, install, take action on the construction end of that. Section 22 does not have that. It was felt collectively that that was not a reason to wait 2 or 3 years to hope that we got it as 1179A project, because there is always the opportunity to start an 1179A project at a later date. And we're hopeful that the results of this analysis is what we need to push to get that going. Okay, so it does not, going this avenue does not prevent us from getting to that construction authorization. It's just a way to do something now versus hoping to do something later. The financial investment on both sides is the same. The cost share is the same. So it doesn't cost the local sponsor or the federal government any more or any less. It would be the same level investment we'd have in 1179A. So we had that discussion in these past steps, and I recognize many of your faces. I've been up here many times over the past 15 years. And then it was about, I would say, roughly a year ago this time, we got serious about discussing whether this was the time to move forward on this. As Tim said, we're up here a few months ago, and then we're up here back in the fall to kick this off. And all of those meetings, while haven't been officially associated with the project, were all leading us to this point. Okay, they were getting us to where we are now, which is this phase one. Okay, as we sit here in this room, we're in phase one, and phase one is to identify the structure of the study. Because as we all know, I'd love to, from the engineering side, I'd love to look at 100 different alternatives, and I'd like to look at all of these things. And I'd like to do this analysis and that analysis and the third one. And every one of those has dollar signs behind it, okay? So we intentionally put this phase one on the front here so that we all cumulatively together agree on what's most important to get out of this, what our objectives are, what our goals are, and what we want the product to look like at the end. So there's essentially four main bullets to this phase one. Identify the study objectives and look at the goals. Identify constraints. That's something that's not been a significant part of the discussion yet, okay? But needs to be because there may be constraints that limit or take alternatives off the table sooner or later, or not at all, if we can work through those constraints. And once we have identified that, we are going to start the process today of collaborating on the study scope for phases 2 and 3. And those are the phases where we will do the engineering, environmental, economic analysis of different sediment management options, and we will look at the feasibility of those. And at the end of that phase 3, we get to this study outcome of a sediment management plan. And that plan, we intend to identify the feasibility, the likelihood of a number of different sediment management actions and how effective they will be at helping us maintain Lewis and Clark Lake. We have phase 2 and phase 3, and some of you may be wondering, well, why are there 2 phases there? That is simply broken up because in some earlier discussions, we felt that there are a few high priority questions we need to address on the front end as we do this process. And so we wanted to get those out early, and we wanted to attack those head on early. We didn't want to spend a whole lot of money in one giant phase and get to the end and find a stopper. I'd like to find my roadblocks and my obstacles sooner, so that we know how to approach them and attack them. And one of those is, we'll talk here in a little bit, is the idea of sustainable economics in reservoirs, or life cycle economics for reservoirs. It is a non-traditional economic model, in the sense that it's an economic model that our agency doesn't currently use, but is widely used when looking at the economic value of sustainable systems. Okay, so we're going somewhere a little bit new, and in talking with Dr. Roland Hotchkiss and Sandy and all the MSAC folks, if there's extreme heartburn in doing that, I want to address that now and get that cleared up before we get all the way to the end of a huge study and have somebody say, we don't like that. And I honestly expect there may be some people that don't like that. Okay. So that's what we're going to do here in phase one, and we'll gather all your information, all your feedback, all your ideas. Today, good, bad, indifferent, zany, crazy, doesn't matter. My whole career has been full of what people tell me are terrible ideas, but occasionally one of them works out. So why not? Phase two, when we get done with this phase one, we'll have a set of tasks, essentially a scope, a schedule, and a budget for phase two and phase three. Phase two, this is our kind of our purpose statement right here, our intent. We want to focus on leveraging existing sediment management studies coupled with the application of economic models to consider the costs and benefits associated with sediment management. And phase three would expand that technical analysis to add emerging technologies, integrate environmental benefits, and then in the end, wrap that all together into a sediment management plan. And please, at any time, this is extremely informal. If you have comments, feedback, questions, let me know. We put this phase two together this way, as many of you know and have been up here for presentations that I've been here over the last 5, 6, 7 years, through the Missouri River Recovery Program, through the O&M support of the projects, through the Corps' Regional Sediment Management Program. We've done some studies that involve sediment flushing, looking at the sediment trap efficiency of the system, looking at dredging costs and the logistics, and yes.
Since the last time we met in April, I think you addressed us at that time as well.
Yes, I did.
Okay. Can you tell us what progress you made from the last time? Because this is a lot of repetition from where we've been before, and I was just wondering what happened since the last time we met that you feel is constructive that's getting us down the road further.
Well, I'm in the middle of a review of what we've done in the past, and in about 15 minutes here, we'll get to the new stuff.
Okay.
I can skip the review if nobody wants to hear it. If you want to get straight to the other stuff.
You're doing fine.
Okay. All right. So, in the past, we've done sediment flushing studies. We've done transport modeling. We've done an estimate of dredging costs that we collaborated with New Orleans District. As you might guess, dredging sediment from the reservoir, if one, you have to decide where to put it. Two, if you decide to say put it down the river, how do you get it there? What are the impacts to our downstream stakeholders and the like? But those existing sediment management studies, there's been orders of magnitude of effort invested in those over the last decade here. And so what we want to do is essentially take the results from those studies, refresh them slightly with any new information we have, and then take those and apply these traditional benefit cost ratio economic model and this life cycle economic model to them and see whether they shake out differently, see whether there is that different economic model justifies some type of sediment management that wouldn't be justified under a traditional benefit cost ratio. Okay? And then we'll expand what are those emerging technologies, the environmental benefits and the like, and move from there. So that's phase one, phase two, and phase three. We're in the middle of phase one right now. Jim, do you still have the zapper?
Yep.
Okay.
What do you want?
Give me the next slide there.
Mine.
All right. So, and I'll say this, as Tim goes through these, a lot of these will look very similar. What we did is we looked at section 1179A guidance as written by the Corps and the actual authorization written by Congress. And a lot of these opportunities, goals, and stuff you'll see will mirror somewhat what Congress and the Corps put out in that original authorization.
Yeah, one question for you.
Yeah.
I know recently the Bureau of Reclamation just announced those winners of that contest.
Yes.
And I guess if there was like a pilot project possibility, could we use some of what we're gathering here to help provide the basis for some type of pilot project?
here at. Well, yeah, certainly. So what Sandy's referencing is we're partnering with the Bureau of Reclamation on. Some of you may have seen it. It's a public challenge. It's called the America Competes Act, put together a few years ago, and it asks for creative Americans to come up with solutions for difficult problems, and those problems are all over the board. One of the ones that we most recently did was creative ways to manage, to collect, transport, and place sediment from reservoirs. We just completed the initial analysis on that, and we wrote some checks for some pretty good ideas, and we're moving forward in the next 3 months here to getting a couple of those solvers, we call them, or inventors, to try and build some bench scale and then maybe some pilot scale examples of those sediment collection, either collection or transport methodologies. There's a lot of overlap with mining industries and the like, and so there's some really neat ideas there, and we're working with them to partner on development of pilots. And when that next step moves along, we'll certainly be considering all the different places we could install a pilot for something like that. And I would certainly think for any of those technologies where their sweet spot is medium fine sand, that this part of the world's right on the top of the list to suggest for a pilot. Yeah.
Are those entries, are they proprietary or are they public information?
They're proprietary at this time because the idea still belongs to the inventor at the end of this phase one. Now, as we go into this phase two and there is public funding used to develop the pilots, those technologies move into the public sector through legal agreements there. So yes, they are private right now, but they will not be by the time they are scaled into something that can be applied to a full-size reservoir.
Paul?
Yes.
I got a question. Just to kind of clarify things in my mind before we go forward with the funding sources now. We're doing this Section 22 planning,
Yep.
sediment planning. There's a cost for that.
There is?
Is that where the 50/50 cost share comes in
Yes.
at this point?
Yes.
Has there been a cost estimate for where we're at now? Because the last scoping meeting I went to, MSAC was asking for monetary support from states of Nebraska and South Dakota.
Right.
And that was for this planning effort, that this Section 22
Yes, at
planning
this,
effort?
Tim, do you want to summarize where we are in
Yeah,
that cost share agreement? Okay.
All right. Yeah, where we are right now is we've signed a cost sharing agreement, the Corps and MSAC. Mark, you signed yes, right? And we've received the check for the cash contribution, and you just have to make up and keep track of the in-kind contribution. That check is unfortunately not electronically transmitted. We have to send that check to Billington, Tennessee to go through that process. So we're expecting maybe in another 3 weeks it might be in our account. It's a slow process. It's the government. What do you expect? But we're moving forward, and we have been forward. So that's where we are with that. And when we're done today, we'll have more information, hopefully, we may not be able to cost, in fact, we probably most likely, last time we did this last year, or within a year, we weren't able to cost out right there and then. But we had enough information, and we went back, Paul went back, and he started costing out each of the activities that had to be done. Then that way you have a better idea. And because of financial constraints that we all have, the 2 phases, the 3 phases were broken up that way to find out, and make it separable units, but also something that's tangible if you want to move forward, if you can't get the funding right away, or you want to hold off. The report that will come out of the second phase will be integrated, as was said up there before, will be integrated into the final report, but it could also stand on its own. So we are mindful of constraints. That particular constraint, that might be a constraint that we put up there too, when we get there. So that's where we are with that.
Can I add a little bit to that?
Yeah.
Included in your folders, there's 2 documents, a draft memorandum of agreement and a stakeholder resolution. And we just kind of see those as a vehicle to kind of solidify the agreement between stakeholders and MSAC. This first phase, we anticipated it to cost $24,000. And so MSAC share was $12,000, and that's what MSAC is committed to so far. So with this phase 1, then we'll determine how much phase 2 is going to cost and phase 3. And then we'll be able to fill in some of the holes in our agreement. But on the back of this sheet, we have a list under opportunity of the entities that have been willing to contribute. But we've kind of been talking about a moving target as far as costs, so we want to see that list expand yet. And I mean, we felt comfortable enough going forward with phase 1 that we find funding for phase 2.
That's it? All right, the next 3 slides, I'll probably go through them quickly because we're going to revisit them. This is why we're here. I'm not going to read these off to you right now, but you have a copy of it. This is the problem statement that was developed so far. We're going to revisit that in a little bit to make sure does it accurately reflect what you're trying to do. As you see, it's blank over here. That means anything's possible from this point forward. It can be rewritten completely, modified, wordsmith. We've done it before. We'll do it again. And we'll start there. Now, I'll move over there and start writing stuff down eventually. The same thing with the opportunities. And then the objectives. Forget about this number. When I was revising this, I was thinking of one thing and doing another. Forget about that goals, you can chop that out. What the numbers mean, the red numbers each objective that is defined at this point, which may change. They may be deleted, they may be wordsmith, amended a little bit, other ones included. We've seen that last year as well. But the red number indicates what phase it's applicable to. Paul went through it relatively recently and said, hey, let's try this up. I had all the objectives for each phase. I wasn't quite sure how this was going to turn out. So he went through and said, hey, we can do this in phase 2, we can do this in phase 3. Some were applicable to both phases. So we'll revisit that as well. And that could take a 180-degree turn as well. And as you can see with this slide, we have no constraints. So the way this presentation is set up, it may seem overly pedantic, but it keeps everything on track. And it gives you time to think about what's going on, plus you have it there. So you definitely have to hopefully come up with something here. And I think financial constraint could be a possible candidate there. So now we're going to move into what we're going to do is we're going to review and refine the problem statement, and this is where you open it up. However you want to do it. I can read it if you want me to, and then we'll start wordsmithing it and say, okay, we agree with this, get rid of that word it's in. Paul will be taking notes. I'm sure Greg will jump in, facilitate things as well, make sure we understand what we're doing. Go through the opportunities, revisit the objectives to make sure we get them right, we have what we want to be, and most importantly, I'm going to jump ahead here for a second. I'll wait till we get there. For the phase, I'll go back. For these 2 statements here, no, you want to, is this correct? Do you want to reword that? And that sort of sets the stage for the objectives that Paul came up with through statements. So revisit that as well. We'll take this information, we'll update the project management plan to amend it with the 2, where it'll have 3 phases in there, it'll have 3 budgets separated out, and 3 schedules for each phase. And whether we sign that again or not. So there's the problem statement. I'm sure most of you see it before. Has anybody not seen this? Yes, no? Does this, I think it's all in there. Does this adequately reflect what you think the problem is? Take your time. Everybody can read that? In this room, that is?
Top of page 3.
Do they have visual on the phone?
I don't think so.
The combination of Missouri River water and reservoir management, the interruption of dynamic flows in the Missouri River, and chronic sediment delivery from the watershed have resulted in sediment deposition in Lewis and Clark Lake, the Missouri and Niobrara rivers, Brazil, and Ponca Creeks. In addition, bank and local drainage erosion have added to the total sediment impact. Does this adequately reflect it? Paul, you want to jump in there or say anything? Greg? it's kind of, it's wordy.
Maybe just say, we've talked about it before, I think there's other statements in the PMP that talk about the watershed in general and other tributaries, not to exclude any other tributaries, I guess.
What was that?
Well, there's other tributaries in South Dakota,
That could be affecting it?
And Nebraska.
Shelby Creek. So what do you think about just shortening it up?
Yeah, to include the
Because-
James River.
Because if you're not gonna name them all, then why name any of them?
Yeah, I'll fess up, I wrote this, right? So if you don't like it, it's my fault, not theirs. But, you know, I guess the intent here from a, you know, running the numbers point is that, from the measurements we have in the system, you know, the Niobrara, the Missouri, Bazille, and Ponca Creek, and erosion along the banks of the reservoir, that math adds up to 95 to 97% of the input into the system. So we can either say everything, or we can list the primary offenders, or we can list everything. Those are kind of the three levels that you can do it. And I understand what Sandy's saying there, and that's, you know, I tried to put sediment delivery from the watershed to cover all those other pieces that aren't listed there. I know Dr. Hotchkiss made a comment, which is very valid, to remind us as we go through this that it's not just above the dam issue. You know, it is the entire Missouri River. We're not, fortunately here, we're not bound by the footprint of the project, just the lake and the dam. We can consider whatever the sponsors group feels is the appropriate footprint to add all the inputs and take all the losses out of, then that's the appropriate footprint.
Yes.
This is the irritation. I think the definition of the problem is how much is it going to cost if the problem is not fixed? And so as we're going along, any engineering project always makes the decision as to how much is it going to cost if we don't fix it? And just like the bridge over here, if the bridge is out, how much does it cost by not having it in place? And that'll tell us how much we should spend on fixing it. And so in this case here, how much impact, and I guess as far then, because this may not be a fair question, but I guess I'm trying to get a handle on how much is this going to cost us in the limit if we don't fix it? And once we define that, we'll then know how much we should spend on fixing it.
Whether the options are feasible that have been brought to us, there's half a dozen that have been picked as, you know, something that's viable with, and those costs. I don't suppose there's any costs known yet for that.
No, that is right there, Bruce. That is the nuts and the bolts of what we're getting at in phase 2 and phase 3. It's identify these technologies, identify an estimate of what it would cost to make a difference using that technology, and then compare that to a number of economic models that say the benefits are worth this much or they're worth that much,
But we
or
need to
whatever.
run those concurrently so they're getting to a same point at the same time, so we know.
Right.
This is the irritation. That sediment is an irritation, and it's costing us money eventually. And once we know as to how much that money is costing us, it'll sure give us a better idea as to what target we're shooting for.
So, well, with that, so I'm wondering, since sediment is the issue, see, sediment is the problem, correct?
No, the whole money it costs us is the problem. Sediment is the
Well,
irritation.
you're not even at that point yet. What is your problem? The problem, what do you have a problem or concern about?
Money.
Well, what, the money's gonna do what though?
Minimize
Fix a problem.
minimize that loss.
Right. So you gotta identify what the problem is to understand what has to be studied.
Sediment in the river.
Well, the loss of use of whatever it happens to be over the period of time. And what it's gonna cost to remove that over the period, that same period.
Well, that's, you're resolving the problem then.
Yeah. But that-
So if
that's
the
the target we
problem,
have
I'm
to
just
shoot
gonna hypothetically speak and simplify it, the problem is sediment buildup in the
That's
reservoir. You're losing the
semantics, yeah.
capacity for it to hold water, correct? And this is hypothetical, I'm not saying it's true. That would be a problem. Then how are you gonna address that? It could be a more complicated problem than that. So the issue here that we have to first define is what is the problem that you, as a community or MSAC, is concerned with?
And I guess if the problem is so expensive that it's gonna cost us $1 trillion,
I think what we're trying to do here is, first of all, we have to identify that problem, and that's what we're doing in this step, correct?
Well,
And then-
isn't your sediment the system of the erosion that's happening, whether it's bank erosion, all the way up to the tributaries from Niobrara and above? So yeah, we're dealing with the sediment problem.
Yeah.
Which
At
is,
a large scale, I think, if we simplify, it's sediment is in the wrong place at the wrong time for the uses we have for the river.
and
Is it more complicated than that?
No, I think the uses for the river and the lake is key. The sediment is the problem. It's affecting those uses as we see it now. The lake can fill in. We're still gonna have uses out there. You're still gonna have hunting, fishing, a lot of recreation. It's gonna be a different type
They'll
of
be
recreation.
different, right? Uses
It's gonna-
will change
it's
as
gonna
the system
shift.
changes.
So it depends on what the users want, what kind of a shift they want or they don't want to shift. If you want to maintain things the way they are,
Right.
yeah, but it all goes back to the sediment aspect of it. That's the affecting component for this resource.
And I think that's really valuable to think of when we get to constraints, because some of the constraints may be that we don't want the uses to change, and it might not be a constraint for other users. Okay.
Yeah, and I would say that to the gentleman, addressing the gentleman's question, whether it's a problem, it's a cost, or it's a sediment, if you identify the problem, you go through the whole analysis, say, hey, this is how we can fix it. The problem is we don't have enough money. I would say we need to definitely put that down as a constraint. And then from there, if the problem is a sediment, no matter what you come up with, it's going to cost money to fix it, right? So, and as I started this off, there are constraints with finances for all of us. So putting that down may give the opportunity, as part of what the economic analysis, as I've heard through the discussions, is try to figure out what models we can use to facilitate that process to make it economically viable and eliminate as much constraint as possible. Right now, the way things are done, it almost looks as if it's impossible, but not necessarily. We don't know. That's a conversation I had on the phone the last time I did.
And that's where the life cycle
Yes.
economic model comes into this, because if we go approach this as the Corps has always done projects like this isn't gonna work. But that's one of the things that's nice about this, is we're gonna try and get into that to start with. And if we can't cross that bridge, there's basically nothing we can do. So that's why this is a good way to do this. We're in one of these early steps, we're gonna face that. Are they gonna look at what's gonna happen in 100 years? What are our grandkids' benefits to this versus what we've had, versus the 50 years they thought these dams would last back in 1957? So that's a part of it to me.
What's going on right now is perfect. This is exactly this discussion that needs to take place, so we can figure out what we're gonna do. Now, I'll let you know, I am an economist. And agree with it or not, what economists do, typically, in order to do a project, we look at what's called the benefit-cost ratio. And it has to be greater than 1, where the benefits exceed the cost, in order to proceed with that project. We do this all out the world, and the Corps is not unusual. They do the same thing. It's a measure. It's one way to find you proceed with the project or not, and you use other criteria. Well, with this, and this is the conversation I just had recently, is, hey, the project's already done. It's now, do you want to define what you're going to do to fix it as a project, or do you want to define it as an O&M, or you want to define it as something else? So we're not there yet of understanding what's the best way to proceed, and that's part of doing this, understanding how are we going to move forward. And part of the exercise of doing this is, let's think outside the box, particularly from both Greg and Mike's boss, is what can we do, think of this thing differently from an economic point of view to get it moving forward and get a result. Because this isn't going to be the only issue throughout the country with sediment. Yes?
Well, what may be missing from this statement is reference to the adverse consequences of the sediment building up. If you don't have a sense for those consequences as a part of the problem. I mean, if there's sediment building up, but it's not causing a problem, it's probably not a problem. It becomes a theoretical exercise.
I agree wholeheartedly. I was thinking the same thing, that like, so basically, if you boil this down, what we're saying is sediment is depositing in Lewis and Clark Lake, Missouri River, and Niobrara Rivers, and Brazil and Ponca Creeks. That's 5 lines of text. That's what it boils down to. We're basically saying sediment is depositing in those places. So what? We need to be able to characterize what the impact of that is. So like if it was a flood risk management study, it would oftentimes say something like, recurring flash flooding is causing risks to life and property in this watershed or this community or whatever, on a recurring basis or something like that. So
There's an example right now that we're confronting that illustrates what we're talking about, and that is that the sediment that's built up in Ponca Creek is resulting in the flooding of lazy river acres over time, and it's not going to be that much longer. I brought some pictures that show the extent of that flooding, and it'll also impact the costs associated with the Highway 12 project. That intersection there with Raider Swanson Road and Highway 12, unless that whole area is seen as a consequence of the sediment buildup, that needs to be resolved. Otherwise, you have a public safety issue insofar as the 200 homes at Lazy River Acres that may not have public access.
To include the community of Lynch.
I have a question, if I may. How long has MSAC been in existence?
Nearly 20 years.
Why were you formed?
Larry's on the phone, but it stemmed from Southeast here. There was a buyout there in regards to a sedimentation problem.
So that was the very first problem that was identified of why MSAC was identified
Well, I
or
think
formed.
there were plenty of problems before that, but I think what people came to realize was that it wasn't going to be one county, one city, one neighborhood that was going to be able to do something about it.
Okay, let me back up then. Before MSAC was formed, what were the anecdotes of everybody complaining about, no matter what community it was, that dealt with why we're here if we fast forward?
It was the F word, flooding.
There it is.
It was flooding.
Well, actually, it was the groundwater around Niobrara that was seeing the basements in town filling up and the inability of farmers to get in and harvest their crops because of the absence of the spring. And I mean, it was just the regulation.
Okay, I'm saying, so it was flooding that got somebody's attention. Would you agree with that?
Also, being able to manage the river, the flow as well.
Well, I'm just trying to get to some point here. So if it was flooding that got somebody's attention, in other words, anything could happen, as I think Greg goes, and nobody would notice. Somebody notices something. And then that something that was noticed translated into a sediment deposit issue somewhere along the line. Now the question is that the correct problem? Or is it the problem still to this day? That's just one way that I'm looking at the issue. So we're all here for a reason, and it started at least 20 years ago, but before it was actually formed, the community was discussing something.
It actually started right after the lake was created in Springfield. I found letters that people conceived sediment was going to be a problem a year or 2 years after.
What made you look at the letters?
We're looking at history, and
Why were you looking at the history though?
we're trying to understand this problem better.
What problem? I'm not picking on you. You're getting there. See, something initiated something somewhere.
I think their recreation was probably a big concern, along with water intakes, because Springfield's a little bit more on a bluff. The recreation area is down at the level of the river, of course, but I think it comes back to the authorized purposes. We anticipated all these benefits. And with the sediment coming in, we see the benefits withering away. And opposed to the flooding, which is a very direct impact felt in a big way, these other ones are withering away more slowly. Like if you're at Yankton, you're trying to sustain those benefits.
So we observe things, and if we were observing things, is that you were supposed to get recreational benefits from this lake, right? And you observed that, and you believed that you were getting benefits at that time, what, that 7 years ago, it was built or something? Then all of a sudden, somebody's going out and fishing or something, they dropped the line in the lake and said, hey, it's not going down 20 meters, it's only going down 5 meters, what's going on here? That may not initiate anything right there and then, but say, hey, where's all the fish? That might get somebody's interest. So one aspect that we're looking at is that the recreational benefits have deteriorated based on what your original perceived or what you're supposed to be getting out of this project. That was caused by sediment. So we're still back to, it looks like from that one example, sediment is causing the problem.
I think we're comparing apples to, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it really doesn't matter if it's money or it's sediment. It is a problem. That's the end of the discussion. It is, I'm sorry for my speech problems. It is a problem. And whether it be sediment or financial, it's a problem.
I agree with what you're saying, because some fact that you can say here.
We can sit here and debate all day long about whether it's financial or whether it's sediment, but it's a problem.
Got to focus on the solution.
Well, I'm not focusing on the financial right now. I'm focused on what is the problem.
Well, the problem is, and I'm going back, I grew up in this area, and I'm 66. Well, will be 66. So I have lived in the Verdell area basically all my life. There has always been flooding, even prior to my being on this earth. And it was all due to the influx of water, whether it was rain, snow, ice, that caused flooding. And so the dams were put into place to help prevent and control this. Then we have the recreational come into it, and it affects the farming. For years, the Missouri River has taken banks, big chunks of it at one time, within hours, not even hours. I remember working on the farm, moving irrigation pipes. We would go to lunch and come back, and 12 to 20 feet of the bank would be gone off the river. That dirt is going somewhere. And this is just continually building up. It's eroding economically. Farming, we can no longer farm some of the properties down along the river west of the Lazy River Acres because it's underwater, and this is all from the Ponca Creek not having banks. And when the creeks were supposed to have been cleaned out, I just observed this myself personally within the last 3 years that I've been back here living permanently. The creeks were never cleaned out with the trees that fell into it. It's going to collect the sediment. They're not going to go anywhere. We have no banks down there on Raider Swanson Road. It is solid water. When the creek has water in it, I have refused to go on Raider Swanson Road even though they have repaired it, because I never know for sure whether we can actually get through it. So I go up through the hills that have been maintained. That hill has been there for longer than I have, and it's in better condition now. But what we've got is all this dirt, and where things are not maintained, and I blame us humans. We get so wrapped up in the discussion of how we should solve this, what we should do, and we don't take the time to do it. We have to act. We can't just have discussions about it. We have to do something physically and get out there and correct it. If we don't, the whole bottom area is gonna go, Niobrara will eventually go, Springfield will go, Yankton will go, if we don't do anything. And talking and talking and talking does not solve anything. We have to get out there and get off our butts and work and get it cleaned up. And when people are supposed to have cleaned up, the Ponca Creek, for example, they come and supposedly cleaned it out. Well, we had flooding. I happened to catch one of the county guys. I said, what's going on here? Why is this road closed? Well, we're waiting for gravel to go in here because the Ponca Creek is flooded. I said, well, part of the problem is you still have the trees out in there that were never removed last spring. And he said, you mean they never come back to do that? No, the work was not done. People don't follow through. And I'm sorry I'm getting so irritated, but I have seen so much economic impact all along the river, whether it be farming, recreational, what have you. I mean, we can't just sit on our behinds and do nothing but talk.
So the problem is not settlement, the problem is not financial, the problem is lack of doing something.
We have to be proactive and move forward.
And if this letter of intent that Mark brought up will do that with the stakeholders, fine.
Well, let me ask one thing about that, Tom. I'm still deciphering stuff. If the problem isn't sediment, if the problem isn't financial, which I'm not agreeing or disagreeing, but the problem is lack of doing something. If somebody's gonna do something, what are they gonna do? And what's the point of doing something? Just to chase their tail? Or what's the purpose of that inertia?
Preventing what we're experiencing, all the flooding and the lack of being able to have an economic income to survive.
Dr. Good, you're never gonna get us to agree that everyone here has a common denominator in what is important. What's important at Ponca Creek is not important in Lewis and Clark. And although it does impact, when we get up in the morning, we have a different mentality.
Do you have watershed districts?
Absolutely.
And do they have inspections and maintenance?
Well, now when you're talking watershed, what are you specifically asking? I'm sorry, I have been away from the area, but I've seen this eroding over the years. Now my mother has passed away, and they have fought this for years. And like it was brought up, this organization has been together for 20 years. What's been done? Nothing. It's talk. As far as protecting the land, we have rocked continually. And this is on the Missouri side. I'm talking about the Ponca Creek. It used to be you could tube all the way down under all the bridges. But because over the years, all the debris and everything, which impacts your bigger streams the same way, when it all goes into the river or into the tributaries that come in, it's gonna stop the water flow, and the water's gonna go wherever it can go. It doesn't care if there's supposed to be a bank. It's gonna go around everything else. So what we have tried to do is maintain the riverbanks, which is an economic issue, because I spend a lot of money just on the section of property that we have. I'm not talking about the people along the river, Lazy River Acres, which is down below us. I'm talking about further up the stream. What can we do? We keep doing this, but it doesn't help. The Ponca Creek, nothing is done. That has eroded so badly that the fields, there are fields that can't be used this year because of the sand impact, which is the same as the Niobrara because of the buildup of the sand. Everything, there needs to be an easy flow for the water to go through, and whether farmers can't do anything because we're not supposed to touch the tributaries. If you do something, you're going to get in trouble and you're going to get fined. You can't economically fight the government to try to maintain your properties. I mean, something, I don't know. It's frustrating to me.
I think, there's got to be a lot of things happening at the same time here. And I think MSAC and this process with the Corps gives us the best opportunity for a long-term, broad spectrum solution that will help everybody in the entire region. So that's what I'm here to do today, or to work towards today. There are a lot of other issues in specific locations that entities that have authority in those locations or jurisdiction in those locations need to be working on also. That's what we try and do. And do we have enough money to do it all? No, but we do what we can. But there needs to be a bigger, broader, long-term solution. And I believe that's what I'm here trying to help MSAC get done today. So, and I know it takes time, and I wish it didn't. I wish there was $1 billion sitting here right now for us to go start some project that.
I think there are spiderweb impacts to this major imbalance of sediment, and it manifests itself in a whole bunch of different ways. Depending on where you sit in the watershed, your experience and your impact is different. But in most cases, through how many degrees of separation, we can usually tie it back to this sediment imbalance issue that is created by the reservoir system. Based on what I heard here a little earlier, I think there were some great points made about not just saying it's a sediment thing, but making some realizations maybe in expanding the statement to say there are economic impacts and there are reduction in benefits and there are all these things that are a direct result of that first problem statement. And so I will certainly do that. We have some base numbers done by Dr. Hotchkiss. We can put some numbers out there and we can say that we've had relocations, we've had loss of benefits, we've had economic impacts, we've had these things to make that problem statement a little more holistic.
And then it's also about forecasted
Good point.
the impacts in the future.
Right, and making some sort of statement that this is not a sustainable system and that impacts will continue to increase going forward.
Yeah, and I think, Paul, you have some good numbers on that of the impacts that we've seen already and what we can expect in the future.
Yep, I agree.
And part of what makes this complex too, we would have been doing this decades ago, but there's impacts downstream. We're trying to approach this in a holistic manner so that we're not detrimentally impacting people downstream. We have to come up with ideas that are going to gain more acceptance than just ours.
Like, my problem may not be like somebody else's problem.
True, very true.
So you gotta look at everybody.
I got a couple things to say. The main reason why MSAC was formed, one of the main purposes not only was to education. And I think the reason we're here is part of the results of what MSAC has done to educate about the problem. Now the problem is the interruption of dynamic flows of the Missouri River. The sediment is actually one of the symptoms of that interruption. If you want to go back to what caused the problem, it may be the building of the dams. But the dams were there for a purpose for flooding. Now, when we have a problem, we need to find what the root cause of that problem is. We can treat all kinds of symptoms, but I think we need to figure out what the root cause is before we start throwing money around on a lot of simple.
Yes.
I'll take a little lighter approach. My beloved Minnesota Twins have no pitching. They have one good pitcher, and MSAC has been that pitcher over the last 20 years. And they're never going to advance, in my opinion, unless they get some help for MSAC. And that's, all of you here are good hitters. You're all trying. And Charlie, I'm going to bring up Yankton, so if you get offended, tough shit. But anyway, my father and father-in-law, both in the 60s, and when I was dating my wife, both told me time and again the reason we got the problem coming down the pike is because of the dam at Yankton. It was supposed to be built, number one, above the Niobrara, and number two, at that bluff there, 2 miles west where the road curves on the bottom road there by Yankton. And they've got to address this. And we've tried to come with different answers, and there's several different solutions. And number one is probably the biggest is the sedimentation. In the 70s and 80s, Prudential Life Insurance and these other companies bought up a bunch of land up there on the rivers and turned it into irrigation and tore up the grasslands. And that really increased your flow of sand. And that still hasn't been addressed adequately in many people's opinion. And anyway, and then the other thing was, the other simple solution is to breach the dam. And holy smokes, Charlie, count to 10. Don't get too mad up there. That is the most simplest solution to get rid of the sediment, but you're just passing it down the river. But what happens when you do that, you have a huge economic loss to Yankton. And the other thing is to build that dam above stream if you can't address the sedimentation issues above the Niobrara River like was originally intended. And they say that can't be done. Well, MSAC's done a lot of wonderful things. They said there'd never be a bridge at Springfield. They said there'd never be ethanol. They said that I would never be in public office. They, in fact, condemned that fact. That was an impossibility. So, I mean, nothing is impossible nowadays. Nothing. And maybe MSAC and you guys and all of you working together can do something. The other thing about pitching, and we had like heavy hitters like Nelson and B. Ryder and Johnson and a guy named Daschle that came through for some of these big projects. Maybe it's time to, when you get finalized on your top items, to go and really hit the congressional people to prioritize some of these things, because when my dad and father-in-law with 8th grade educations, and they were not dumb in any sense of the word, but they said this was a mistake done back when the bridge was built. I mean, and other people knew this too, and now we have to rectify that decision and make some good, smart choices in the future. So, again, I tried to turn a little humorous in with a little barb there, and no way am I picking on Yankton, the town that we all love, the river by the city by the river, whatever. But, you know, that was the truth of the matter, and that Prudential thing tearing it up, and the sedimentation issue in Nebraska is huge. We do have some in South Dakota as well. But, and you know, man can't always change what God has made, but we can try and we can make it better. And the Grand Canyon Dam, Hoover Dam, you just go up there and look what they did with something like that. And we just need to commend MSAC for being the lone good pitcher out there that's doing the good job. So, end of story.
Is $5 million enough money? Even with matching funds would make it 10. Is that, did I hear that number right?
I don't know what number you're talking about.
The $5 million is how much the Planning Assistance to States program is appropriated annually. That's not the program that's going to go implement a solution here. It's the vehicle to develop a plan.
Can we talk about the one that is going to be implemented then?
It's never been appropriated. Congress authorized the 1179 and worded 2016. That particular provision has not seen a dime since it was authorized. So we don't have a vehicle to implement a sediment management plan. We're going to develop one, and hopefully that vehicle gets funded, and we will be able to work with everybody to implement something. But at this time, there is not a core authority other than operation and maintenance funding, which is tight every year on every reservoir project, that we could really look at a systematic way to manage sediment on any of the reservoirs. We don't have that vehicle right now.
$5 million doesn't sound like a lot of money.
$5 million is just to do Section 22 studies. Okay, it has nothing to do with designing and constructing an actual project. That comes from another authorization. Congress has authorized 1179A, but they have not funded that authorization yet.
So that's basically what we need to do, is go to Congress, the powers that be, and say, get this funded to help these people.
That's what this whole group is, we cover the area. We're tribes, we're counties, we're towns, we're farmers, we're everybody trying. Nobody's done this before. That 1179A, nobody has ever got any money from it, which is, how Tim just stated it. So we're kind of breaking new ground. We're not sure how to do this, but what we're doing is trying to do our best to get at it. And yeah, we're trying to do it as fast as Tim said. This planning assistance to states, or the Section 22, is a faster way to approach this so that we can get some of the studies done first and then approach the construction sooner than we could have another way. So I understand you're not familiar with what we've been doing. It is a lot of repetition, but we are making advances here. And again, I understand what you're saying, that it's frustrating, but we are getting somewhere.
If I can kind of interject from my perspective, and I won't beat this to death too much. I look at it from a science view, wildlife fisheries management view, and a local view, because I grew up on the river. It is a very complex issue. Paula, you alluded to. It's a spider web issue. What's going on in the river right now with the high flows even affects the Ponca Creek and backing up to Niobrara. We see that from our resources standpoint. The river goes down, you're going to see some degradation again in these streams. It's going to clear some things up. Prairie streams, by nature, are designed to meander so that they don't down cut so much. The ebb and flow, the deposition, the erosion, that's part of the process. Things can get out of whack, and then it screws the whole system up. But keep in mind, that's how they're supposed to work, and that's how the Missouri River works. It always has. There's always going to be some flooding. There's going to be high water issues. So there's everything boils down to the placement of Gavin's Point Dam and the deposition of sediment up here, backing water up, the whole thing, the spider web approach. That's still a problem. And whatever the solution is going to be, I view MSAC now and the work you guys are doing as the best shot that I've seen so far into trying to do something. Are you going to reclaim the area like it used to be? No, that's not going to happen. It's kind of like drawing a line in the sand saying, enough's enough. We want to maintain the recreation that we have down on the lake. We want to maintain the land that we have now without doing some more flooding damage, raising the water level up. That is going to be doable in my opinion, but it's going to cost money. And it's going to cost a lot of money. Corps spent up to $25 million for building blocks for sandbars down below Gavin's because we don't have the sediment input. That sediment needs to get down there. Is there some kind of a cost-effective way to do that to help out both situations? I think that's what we need to brainstorm on. Our sand collectors, we need to get into a process of what, based on the science and economics, what we can do to draw a line in the sand. Fish and wildlife don't care if the lake fills in. It'll shift one group to another.
I hate to interrupt you. We're going to drag this out and never move forward. But what's your comment?
I'd just like to interject a little humor with a little message with it. I brought some cottage cheese kuchen today. There's 8 pieces there. And I'd like a little feedback. That's a new research from Scotland Pete's. And some new research, what you guys are trying to do. And then the other thing is Chislic Fest in Freeman this weekend. And if they can make Chislic and put it in pizza, and they're going to have 10 new varieties of Chislic there, and they can do that kind of stuff, this group here can do miracles. You know what I'm saying? That's just a small...
Can we critique your...
Yeah, you can, please, the 7 or 8 that
Can we tell you who can
let me know what you
problem
think. The guy in Scotland and pizzas would like to know.
It's very good.
And I just want to urge this group
It is very
to
good.
continue this and move it forward to look at some of these solutions. There will be some solutions, but they're going to cost money.
Yeah, I want to say, the conversation's great, and whenever I get involved, the first one I got involved with, it was just over 3 hours, and I pushed back on that because I thought 3 hours is never enough time. If this was a bigger study, a 205 study, it would go a lot longer than the 4 hours that we have planned. This is a Section 22 study. I know everybody's got a concern, but somehow we have to have a product at the end of the day, or we're going to have to come back up here somehow and keep moving forward. I just want you to be aware of that. And I got to be the bad guy up here.
I just have one additional benefit from this good work and discussion and MSAC's educational role it's played, is that there's another audience out there that we need to have in mind. And it was mentioned, it is Congress. If you remember, Niobrara was moved because of a congressional appropriation.
The town.
The town, and I was involved in those days, and I also represented the farmers, and we had to sue the United States for inverse condemnation, which we prevailed on, and those dollars are still around in Knox County. But Congress can waive requirements that the Corps has to comply with, and that can come up in an appropriation bill or any kind of a congressional, or Congress could just simply, through its representatives from this area, come up with a legislative solution. And so the more accurately we can state and define the problem that would influence, and we have Senator Sass's representative here, which is great. Senator Fisher's office has been at these meetings. That's another audience that we can influence if the mission and the work that we're doing can concisely focus on the extent of this problem, so that an appropriation can kind of cut through some of the red tape. That would be important.
And I guarantee you, you're not the only community having this problem. So this is an opportunity to start raising the issue. If we can come up with something good here, it can be duplicated elsewhere. That was some of the conversations that Paul and I've had, Greg and Brad. So do we have any idea where we're going with this problem?
Well, I said earlier I would expand this to kind of summarize not just this unequal distribution of sediment idea, but to also point out some of those impacts. And so that we kind of make that an impact statement here. It's like, one, you're right, the root source problem is the water management, the interruption of flood flows that move sediment in the system.
And who does that?
What's that?
Who's in charge of the flow?
Corps of Engineers.
Okay.
Okay, so, but when we're talking both balances here, right? When we talk about, this imbalance due to sediment, we can't just do the math and say the negative of the balance. We also have to calculate the benefits of the reservoirs. The millions of dollars of recreation and water supply and navigation, re-regulation, and flood risk reduction, and all of that goes with it. Hydropower, 8 of them, right? We have 8 different ones that are authorized by Congress, and we try to maximize the benefits in all of those. So I do think we'll expand this some to do that, and we have talked. This is a one-time shot. There is a feedback that'll come through Sandy and through MSAC, and so at this point, I would ask, give me a chance to reapproach this. This is very simple and factual because I'm looking at it from I'm a sediment transport engineer. Okay, I can calculate how a particle of sediment moves anywhere in the river. And this is a very
exciting life.
It's an exciting life I lead, yeah. But this is essentially a description of a sediment mass balance in the system, right? And there is more to that. I am sensitive to that. So give me a chance to expand that, and it'll be part of the feedback loop.
Yeah, and when we leave here, it doesn't mean this is what we're going to end up with. Our process in the Corps is iterative in nature. And we're always going back to where we started and refining that and refining that and refining that.
In regards to this statement here, what was mentioned earlier, I think the only thing you might want to add to it from my perspective would be, and other tributaries. That's all I could see.
Yep, I got that. Yeah, we'll make sure that's all inclusive of all the inputs there.
But I think the ones that are in there should stay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So with the other tributaries, you're looking at the stream degradation, bank erosion as well?
Yeah. as we said, it's spider web. You can connect it to any of the, all the way down to little washes and creeks. They all have some level of impact there. Yeah.
That was good. I wish this could have been a whole day event, and we could really hash this out, argue more. Okay, these are the opportunities that, and you know, when the Constitution was written, as well as the Declaration of Independence, it wasn't a bunch of people sitting in a room that did it. One person did it, and other people decided to critique it and refine it. So we're kind of at that process. Paul came up with some of the stuff to guide this, to give us a framework to start from, and now we're adjusting. So here are the opportunities. Are there any others that you might want to write down, or do you agree with these? You want to reword them? Others that you want to include?
Does that need to be broader, that first, I think about,
I don't think it's just
project benefits and mitigate project impacts. Because it wasn't all positive when there's give and take there. When the project went in, there were, a lot of instant benefits, but there were also a lot of instant impacts due to that.
Yeah, there's lots of off-project impacts.
Yeah.
I think that's one thing we ran into before was if it's defined as a project, it was just looking at the lake first.
That's the way I read it. That's why I'm thinking you need to broaden it personally from what I've been hearing.
Which one? All or?
The term project implies the lake to me, right?
Okay.
So that regional benefits, you have to draw the box somewhere.
Well, I wonder if we could do something we did with Papillion, where we started with the watershed, but then we looked at the regional impacts as well. Is that something we want to address here? But the correct terminology, start with the lake and then expand out from there.
Wouldn't it be local and regional, because like they said, everybody's affected differently.
Yeah,
So
well,
whatever the local issue is, as well as the regional issue, instead of project.
It won't be a good word. We'll have to figure out a new word, maybe. Project programming or something.
But yeah, I think that's a fair assumption that project does overly limit the footprint, and we don't need or shouldn't.
Regional benefits, more regional, however you want to define region.
Right.
So that's the project area and project benefits is, but then you have to look at the cost too, before you expand it out.
I don't know, would you use the word benefit, would it be more like infrastructure or, I don't know.
Yeah, you could say mitigate the loss of project benefits and adverse consequences.
Yeah, something like that.
Because I know from Congress's perspective, the project benefits is probably something that gets their attention, is that?
Adverse consequences is a big part of it.
Yeah, sometimes the issue, and I'm not disagreeing with that, but sometimes the issue is, depending upon how big you get, it becomes a little complicated, sometimes cumbersome to try to figure out how to quantify those other things. It can be, you may not get what you want because it gets so complicated that you're not going to be able to do it. So that's the reason why sometimes you take a smaller area to understand it better. And then there's also a cost factor to all that as well. Not that I'm shutting it down, wrote it down. Opportunities.
If you're missing the loss of the intakes, the people that are taking water out of the lake that are being impacted by the sedimentation, that's not our thing. That's what's going to be captured in those.
But is that really an opportunity? You want to define it as an opportunity? We can change these around, and we can hit all the time, oh, that's not really an opportunity, that's this, that's an objective or something. We can work with that. So you want to take a look at the intakes as well? intake from the reservoir, the lake. By the way, my handwriting is lousy.
I'm just asking, because I don't know exactly what people have in mind, but is there an opportunity, and I think of opportunities of, so it kind of forms the universe of things that I could potentially investigate. And so one of the things that just comes to mind is there an opportunity to investigate, instead of managing the deposition, managing the source of the sediment, so that it never gets to the reservoir in some manner. Now, I don't know what that would entail, and I don't know what people's views on it are, but maybe there's some balance there where you reduce the amount that's coming in from the various tributaries, as well as try to manage what is in the depositional zone already.
Like retention,
from the banks.
like retention basin or something.
Like soil conservation. But
Almost
that's-
kind of like that, yeah.
Watershed. Yeah, watershed district activities, and that actually has been implemented extensively already. That doesn't mean we shouldn't keep working on it.
Okay.
There's substantial efforts.
Essentially, watershed treatment, source treatment, yeah, the Niobrara specifically has had a long NRCS effort for the past.
Those ponds all the way to the top of the drainage have to be addressed to do anything down below. You may have your short-term goal of cleaning out the sediment for, flood control initially, okay? But until you get to the top of the watershed and start putting in the little ponds and the little dams back into the pastures that have been taken out of a lot of the pastures and rangelands that have been turned into cropland and those little ponds and dams, you'll be amazed how much water those small structures hold back in that springtime and when it's creating all this, all the issues we're having with the flooding, especially in the spring. So we've got to work up and get cost share, if you will, or however, but get the individuals that have individual land, private owned land, to put those ponds and dams back into their pastures, rangelands, and cropland. And then work yourself down your watershed.
So I guess you'd say put the ponds and dams back onto private property is what it was?
Yeah, we're gonna have to get private property owners buy into this whole concept.
That's where other federal agencies like NRCS come in.
Sure.
That's a watershed approach which is needed, which has been discussed.
Anything's possible. NRCS, tells people, hey, we'll pay you this if you do that water along, fence it off and all sorts of things. So I guess
There's many conservation practices. Worked with the NRCS for over 25 years. Many conservation practices that can be utilized either at their own expense or cost share money available for programs like this.
In general, I think we anticipated that it wouldn't be like one magic thing that's going to fix the problem. And I don't think what has been done before, though, is to illustrate how all the things can work together to create the balance.
Did anybody take a look in 2011 of what the river looked like when it was completely empty below Gavin's Point Dam?
Yeah.
What the effect was?
I walked over to South Dakota.
Well, I live 2 miles down from the Discovery Bridge. Okay? And I have some photographs of all of that, and I gave it to, a copy of it a couple of weeks ago to the Missouri National Recreational Headquarters of what it looks like out in front of my house, which is covered with tree stumps. Very, very, very dangerous area. We fought for a couple of months down there, sandbagging every day, 15 hours a day, with what happened with that flood. I saw so much sand and sediment roll into that place and ruin the places that I fished for years growing up. 20-foot holes where the fish would be. that are no longer there. It's all gone. So if anybody understands what this is all about, it's me and other people that recreate on that river. We gotta do something. It's not just a problem on the lake, it's a problem for me, I think, because I just got back from a fishing trip. We fished the entire Missouri River system. I was just up in Newtown, North Dakota fishing for a week. And I have never seen that lake up there as high as it is with water. There's a lot of water out there. What are you gonna do? You gotta regulate the river. I understand the Corps has to do that. And I think what's going on here is what's the best way to go about doing that without causing all this impact, spending a pile of money. And because I've heard this before, like when we had the meeting over at Minerva's, there was a meeting over there about sedimentation years ago. We got to do something now. We got to focus on the solution and not a problem. But it's getting worse and worse and worse.
So where's the opportunity? Do you have any opportunities out of that?
I'm sorry?
You have an opportunity?
Yeah, we do, right here.
Out of a project or whatever you want to define it as?
It's a sediment problem. That and the flows. You know? I don't want my house washed down the river, so you gotta let water out. That's the way it is. But if it washes the bank out, that's the way that is. It's kind of hard to put a leash on Mother Nature. That's what I think.
Sandy? Yes. Oh, sorry.
I don't know, I'm still trying to digest what we're trying to do with this opportunity. I guess there'd be an opportunity to balance sediment in the system to benefit the ecosystem below the dam.
I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but to me, in my mind, it's like taking a garden hose and laying it out on the ground and turning the faucet on and watching what happens to it after that. And with the systems of the dams and stuff, you know, this one gets full, you gotta dump the water. Well, there's sediment in that water as well. Where's it going? Well, it's going down to the next place, isn't it? Because it all comes out and it goes like this. It goes to the banks. Now, I'm not a hydrologist, I'm not an engineer by any means, but in my mind, that's, you know.
You don't know, so you got something to come.
Yeah, so generally that's what it means to me. And with Gavin's Point Dam being the last stop, and I love that river with all my heart, believe me. It gets scarier and scarier all the time because, you know, I saw what it did in 2011 and I'm like, oh my God. This is...
You have a question?
So as we're looking at some of these opportunities, so wouldn't it need some of one of the things that the Corps has to do as far as what your responsibilities are related to flood management or flood control, as well as irrigation, water supply, all those different types of things? I mean, isn't that also part of these opportunities? That it also fits into a lot of the Corps' general responsibilities of the management of the river, so that you're increasing some of the capacity of the flow of the river, decreasing the opportunities for flooding, and meeting some of those other objectives. Doesn't seem like those opportunities really fit, or I guess they seem to fit what the Corps' responsibilities are, but aren't necessarily identified in what the study could ultimately help achieve under your discretion or under your authority.
That seems reasonable, and you asked, how did this all start? Before there was the Missouri Sedimentation Action Coalition, there were landowners and business people who got together and formed the Lewis and Clark South Dakota Nebraska Preservation Association. And I know we were pretty naive in those early days. We met with the Corps, and there were some rather colorful sessions with the Corps of Engineers, because at that time, the Corps said everything was going as anticipated. There wasn't a problem. And fast forward 25 years, and we're here today, they recognize there is a problem and we do need to do something about it. But it's frustrating for business people and landowners because the way that Corps of Engineers and the government deals with problems is not the way private individuals deal with problems. There's a whole system of funding that is really hard for us to understand. And
us.
yeah. And so I think we've come a long way in recognizing together that there's a problem and that we need to do something about it, but it's still frustrating for us that it takes so long to do what needs to be done, to identify it and do what needs to be done.
Of the 3 items that are up there, I think the bottom one should be moved to the top, and the other 2 or subsets are results of what that is.
Yeah.
The bottom one is the important thing. It's, once we move this and complete that end, the rest of it's taken care of.
Well, maybe, it may not be feasible. But I don't really like the wording on the last one, because management said, what you're trying to do is it might be more of a redistribution of sediment.
I think that's what the deposition of the stream.
Yeah, but you know, to me, rather than manage sediment deposition, that really doesn't capture what you're trying to do. It's a redistribution of sediment to include that area below Gavin's, downstream reaches, which would be wonderful.
It should say manage sediment deposition into the downstream Missouri River channel.
Something, yeah, I think it needs to be defined just a little bit, explained just a little bit more in that statement.
It needs to be moved below the dam.
Yeah. Ultimately, that would be.
And that, the rest of the other 2 things would be subsets of results of that happening.
Paul, did you write that too? Did you write that?
Yeah.
Do you think that reflects kind of the Corps' priorities, the order that you had, or was there no different?
No particular order there.
Well, the only way to get the first 2 is to do the third one.
Not necessarily.
No.
Oh.
No.
You could do the other 2 without the third one. Just depends on where you put the sediment.
Right.
Okay.
Third one could be.
But if we're talking about everybody in this chain, they need the sediment. And we don't up here.
Depends on who you talk to.
Yeah.
I mean, then
I would say the water management agencies in Kansas City would vehemently disagree with you on that one. So that's why we're building a Missouri-Kansas coalition partner,
The sediment collectors.
Exactly.
The sediment collectors wouldn't necessarily be putting it downstream of the channel.
Right. No, that there does become. I think it's reasonable. I think most of us have come to the realization that the problem is so big that if you start moving appreciable amounts of sediment, you are very quickly going to run out of a place to put it. Just for a rough example, below the pool at 1210 elevation, okay? So at the kind of normal full pool. So that's not including the Niobrara and the Missouri above it, or Brazil or Ponca Creek or anything like that. We catch a football field half a mile high every year. So if I wanted to put that not in the river, I've got to find somewhere else to put that. That's roughly almost 4 million cubic yards. And we all know that, your average bucket loader has a 2 or 3 yard bucket on the front of it. So with a good sized loader, I need 1 million buckets a year. That's what's coming in and collecting below the water level there. So that's part of that was in there was to reinforce that you will get to a point where reintroduction of sediments below the dam must be part of the conversation. Doesn't mean it always has to be, and it doesn't mean that it is the #1 answer, but it will need to be part of the conversation if you're going to do anything more than move a little sand around and open up a few channels or something like that. So
if you leave it as broad as like manage and decrease, you're leaving a lot of different technologies and ways to move sediment, not just flushing it
Right, yeah, this is just a simple relative rate because we don't want to we don't want to be prescriptive here. We don't want to say this is the way to do it, but what we want to do is our opportunity is to reduce the sediment impacts in the reach. Okay, not saying how, and then as we get into the study bullets of what we're going to look at, then we'll drill down to a variety of technologies that are known or new that can do that for us.
With the least amount of impact on the environment.
Right. Those are always the trade-offs that have to be weighed. There may be one that's cheap and highly impactful, and there may be one that's really expensive with very few impacts. Is there something in the middle? That's all the give and take of the balance of the system.
Okay, we're behind schedule drastically. Is there a burning desire? You want to put an opportunity up there?
I've added a few more that people discussed there.
You did? Okay. Move on
Yeah.
to the objectives.
Do we have, these are the ones for, this is the whole list.
This is the whole list for phase 2 and phase 3. I was debating about how to do this, whether you want to just go through them all, you want to take over, and just determine, or what I was thinking about is that it's maybe, and I went back and forth as I was working on this until I left the office. We want to identify some constraints right now, then possibly move into phase 2 here and describe and go through the objectives as it meet what we want to do for phase 2.
Yeah,
instead of doing it twice.
Yeah, so in those following slides, we have it broken out into phase 2 and phase 3.
So we'll skip this objective and figure out, can we identify some constraints?
I think we should, yeah. Let's talk constraints.
Well, let's put financial down there.
In this kind of 15 minutes before we take a little stretch break here, let's throw everything on the screen that'll stick. On a constraint, whether you think it's a global constraint or just a U constraint. We're not worried about scale at this point. We just like to collect as many of them as possible.
We're just going to put them down and we'll work through them and figure out how it fits in. We'll say if the project, if we came up with something, it might be a community financial constraint just to implement. We'll start with that. Greg?
I think Congress is a huge constraint.
Huh?
I think Congress is a huge constraint.
In which respect?
Leadership and commitment. I'm sorry, did I say that?
Falling behind again.
I mean, as far as, commitment to helping us solve this problem. Whether it be there's
What's about community commitment? Just start, forget about, what about community commitment?
We're involved too. I mean, from a local level as well as state level and federal level, all of us have known this is a problem, but there's been a lack of thinking that we're all responsible to solve it. So I don't know how you want to write that down, but
I'm just gonna.
Somebody else's problem, I guess.
It's like a person living in a city, they say it's not my problem. You got a person that lives out along the road. It's their problem.
There's other areas that we can look to for ideas or
lack of proven solutions.
Let me add, would a constraint revolve around real estate somehow? Being able to get, if a project had to be done, access?
Well, competition too. You've got a lot of other bigger projects that might get more. I mean, I know we're not the only ones with this issue. If we're competing against California, what are the odds of us?
Well, let's focus more on just this project, not the whole world constraint.
I don't have that many slides. I cannot type that fast for all the national constraints.
Do you include
We've got plenty of our own problems. Stick to those.
Are you including the constraint of the current cost benefit formula that prevents us from?
We should.
Yes.
Yeah. That's one of the fundamental things we're trying to address here, is it not? Right? All right.
Or how about we try current economic methodologies?
That formula, that present.
Well, that's for projects, whether or not they want to define this as a project or not, or is it a maintenance issue or something. Yeah, I got what you're saying. Benefit cost ratios, typically we'll use them if we're trying to assess what project should we do, okay? Since this project, meaning the dam, was built, do they want to, let's just stick with the sediment right now, the sediment buildup, is that defined as a new project, or is that the maintenance issue? Therefore, the benefit cost ratio may not come into play. It could be something else. I have to assess that.
You're the economist. Whatever.
Don't, I'm sorry to think I'm being thrown in the category as a lawyer, hope no lawyers in there, but probably.
It'll come into play.
Yeah.
It will certainly come into play, for sure. One, the categorization of the project, two, and then under what economic rules it is analyzed.
For the benefit of the people who have not been here for 20 to 25 years, could you just quickly describe what that formula is?
The BC, the benefits over costs,
Yeah,
right?
so you determine what the project benefits are, determine what the project costs are. You want it to be greater than one because then, from a national perspective, the Corps does the project. It has to contribute to the national economic development. And if the costs are greater than the benefits, you're essentially not contributing to national development. You're actually taking away. So you want the benefits to exceed the cost. So if it's 1-to-1, it's a 1. So the benefits over the cost has to be greater than 1.
But is the cost, that you're not taking into consideration the flood problems or anything in the cost?
Sure. The cost, traditionally the cost is cost of implementing the project. The benefits are flood risk reduction and whatever those are. Traditionally, when we've done it on a new project, right, it is new benefits that we are creating. We're creating benefits for a project that didn't previously exist. The one of the fundamental stumbling blocks here is that we are attempting not to create new benefits. We are trying to preserve existing benefits, which are not calculated that way. You can't say $1 million of preserved benefits over $5 a project. So in an oversimplification, but in any type of project to regain a little bit of benefit or prevent the loss of benefit, the numerator, the B, is always 0. Because there's no new benefits. I'm just stopping the loss of old benefits. So in that simplified process, we're fundamentally behind the 8 ball as we can never get above 1 on that simplified system.
Okay, but that's for the Corps.
Right.
Congress could say.
Oh, absolutely.
Could say, we don't care.
It doesn't matter.
About benefit cost ratio. We don't care. We're gonna do the project anyway because it's important and, we're gonna save the loss of the benefits and so forth, so.
Yeah, sometimes our projects will be looking at alternatives that basically produce the same benefits. And it becomes a least cost analysis. What's the cheapest way I can accrue these benefits? So if the benefit side were to go away or get redefined into some other definition, we'd be looking at what's the cheapest thing we could do to increase sustainability and reduce impacts, et cetera. The challenge we have in our the way we do economics is we look at 50-year project lives. So even if we did 50 years starting today, there are economic impacts due to flooding, groundwater, et cetera, that we could measure, and we could measure how that changes over the next 50 years. But probably the biggest economic impact is the future loss of hydropower. That's going to happen 100 years, 150 years from now, when we can't generate hydropower at Gavin's Point Dam anymore because we're running sand through the turbines. Well, I can't take something that doesn't happen for another 100 years and bring it back to a present value and capture that benefit using any of my economic tools I have at my disposal today. And that's part of the reason why we decided to do this planning assistance to state study, was to develop that economic framework around which we want this future project to be justified and get everybody to buy into it. So that when we get to the point where Congress says, hey, give me a plan, we say, we've got a plan and here's exactly the rules that we developed to justify this plan. And hopefully everybody's in alignment on that. That's kind of the grand strategy of what we're trying to achieve. So the economics piece is probably the biggest question mark right now in terms of this. We have a lot of science around different ways we could manage sediment and approximate costs of what that would be, but we don't have a good way to capture what the positive side is.
And that's environmental.
Environmental, sure.
That's gonna be a big one.
And the other one that I would put on there, although I don't really know, I would put the authorized purposes we're not gonna be able to impact the authorized purposes without Congress. I mean, they were written into law, the dams have to try to balance that, so, we have to work within the authorized purposes of the dams at this point.
Is the Corps constrained from doing activities outside its project boundaries without special authorization, or?
Yes. As far as O&M, but.
Yeah, as far as O&M,
But
right?
the other,
New projects, no.
Yeah, that's the beauty of section 22, right?
Yeah.
Tom's rules are different. He has a very well-defined project boundary in which his resources are applied to. Here, we'll be looking well outside of those boundaries because of the interaction between the river and the Niobrara and the reservoir and all of that. But certainly, and that's why something like 1179 is valuable, because that goes to an appropriation that's outside of O&M, and it's not limited by O&M rules. And if Congress says your plan that covers this whole region of the watershed does these actions, then yeah, we can do that.
So like Gavin's point, you can't say as part of our operation and maintenance, we need to dredge around the delta at the Niobrara. They just couldn't do that.
No, not under, not our O&M program couldn't dredge the Niobrara. No, that would have to be under a whatever congressionally authorized project that is, of course, cleared all that with other and collaborated with other federal management agencies. It doesn't mean it can't be done, but yeah, if the pathway were through traditional O&M, it's a little more limited on the footprint where it would work.
Can you dredge in Missouri?
The navigation channel part, we can.
From below Gavin's Point?
Well, we can dredge it up to the mouth of the Big Sioux.
Yeah, but the Big Sioux, yeah.
That's what I thought.
But yeah, the lower 59 of the Wreck River would have to be under some specific project authorization and collaboration with Fish and Wildlife and Park Service and all of that.
Because it's National Recreational River.
Yeah, we have co-agency management on that.
Do we have constraints?
Couple of constraints.
Constraint is uses for sediment.
So that
We've talked about in the past, sediment collectors or dredging, whatever we do, we get this huge pile of sediment. What are we gonna do with it?
I'll piggyback onto that. I'm sitting back here thinking, if it fits in at this point as a constraint or an obstacle, is just the size of the project, the sheer logistics of it. Eventually is, when he starts talking about that amount of sediment, that's going to be a constraint or an obstacle somewhere in the future. It's just the logistics and the amount of sediment and maybe the existing technology and methodology to deal with it could be a constraint or an obstacle.
If we were located outside of Los Angeles, it'd be a different thing. They need the material there. We're where we are, don't have rail lines to it, so what do we do with it?
It could be an obstacle anyway.
Right, yeah, and
It may not fit in here, but it's...
Speaking back to economics, there are lots of dredging projects going on all over the country in reservoirs where water costs a specific dollar of storage per cubic foot, and water is always in short supply. We don't have any of those inherent economic benefits that sit locally with us here. And so we need to have, economics are certainly something a regional or national view. However broad we can make that and look for those benefits, all the better.
If there were no constraints, what would the Corps, what would your dream be? What would you do? Would you build another dam where it should have been? What would you do?
So I have no idea what the answer to that one is. Nobody has ever asked me to come up with a free thinking idea. I mean, come on. I'm kidding. Totally kidding. But
might be right.
no, I mean, if there were no limitations, I think you would see something much more like current dam design, which includes low-level gates and multiple pools and environmental flows and habitat development, sediment transport through the system on an annual or semi-annual basis to retain a majority of that balance. Every dam built in the world now today has some sort of sediment management infrastructure built into it. These have none. and that's why we're here.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Even if you were to
I'm
take the dam,
gonna wrap this up here in a little bit. Yeah, I want to hear him, and then I want to take a break. Go ahead.
Me?
Yes, Mr. Cottage Chair. sorry.
Water development in southern Missouri Water and those different conservation groups have implemented different dam and sediment controls with grasslands and things, and they've been very successful. It's going to have to start at the top, the Niobrara River and the diversion dams and things. And in the past, if any of you remember, it was actually a petition drive in Nebraska to stop the diversion dams that are planning to be put in on the Niobrara River. It was a huge petition drive to actually stop that. So somehow you got to overcome that public thing. Department of Tourism, the canoes going down the river, if that has to be changed, but some type of a program on the Sandhills irrigation close to those tributaries and rivers, the enticements with money to put that into grassland like it was originally put in to reduce the erosion.
That constraint is what, interagency constraint?
Well, and communities. Springfield turned a lemon into lemonade. They were taken away from their boating and their jet skis, and heck, I used to ski down the Missouri right past the Springfield thing, and that's all gone. So they turned the lemon to lemonade and turned it into a fishing and hunting oasis. And, maybe if, so anyway, and what's Yankton, what's the Department of Tourism with Niobrara tubing and that, what's that gonna, cost if we take no action? But that's a simple start, is to get those diversion dams, and the gentleman over there hit it right on the head, those little dams that catch the sediment. The Spencer Dam, I think, was a collection point at one time, and of course that went by the wayside. But anyway, you gotta, those are doable things, very doable.
Okay, we've been going at this for a couple hours. I want to take a 15-minute break. Typically, I've been on it. Thank you, sir. We only have one crown. They cut it into smaller pieces. Go ahead.
We're just gonna get some brief comments from Larry. I know we're far behind right now, so Larry, if you have some comments you'd like to make, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Sandy. Well, I couldn't hear all of the conversation. That's understandable. Not everybody's close to the source there, I guess. But what I could hear certainly sounded positive from my perspective. I know there was at one point a considerable concern, what is the problem and so forth. And I think we know that the sediment is the problem and its negative impact on the authorized purposes, some greater impact than others. But from what I could understand, the dam maybe has some thoughts also, or different thoughts. It sounds like we're working in the right direction as far as what scope of what we want to do is. Questions of me.
Sounds good, Larry. We're glad that you could join us and hear us, and appreciate the positive feedback.
Thank you.
Okay, we ready to continue? We'll address left off constraints. Is there anything else you want to put on there?
It had to do with the, at the present, the Niobrara is the wild and scenic river, so interagency conflicts and stuff.
Yeah, I have, I put interagency community conflicts.
Okay.
That's covered essentially.
I think so.
Any others, burning desires?
Is the existing configuration of the Hammers Point Dam constraints?
Physical structure of it itself. Certainly, depending on which management action you want to take, yeah, I think it's very valid to put a constraint is the physical infrastructure of the project. Yeah.
But with the focus on the dam.
Yeah, in a sense,
But you'd also interrupt the access as far as if you brought it down the Nebraska side from the Niobrara River, you'd be interrupting the access points across there, including all the rivers, the marinas, and that type of access.
So, access restrictions?
During construction and after.
Also for private property.
Others? We already wrote this one down earlier. And burden desires for constraints. I think what I'm gonna do, if we're ready to move on, Paul, do you want me to write, do you want to do the next two for the phases to nail it down, or do you want me to do it and you write? Or you do both?
How about I go through them to get us, yeah, I'll go through these.
Okay, I bypassed the other, first, the objectives, so we didn't duplicate the efforts, and what Paul did is, all the objectives that he took out of it, we added a couple that he added, but they came from 1179A program, or project, correct?
Yeah.
Authorization, and added a couple others, and divided those up to what he thought would go into phase 2 and phase 3. So this is probably gonna be the meat of what we get out of here today as well, besides what we did. And I wanna make one comment too. How this starts off, it's usually, it seems chaotic, which it typically is, and then what I've noticed is that it's starting to refine itself. And through my observation is, you know, from whatever the problem is, and as we started to address the constraints, it started, from my understanding, started looking as if people started understanding better of what we're trying to do here. That's from my observation. Okay, go ahead.
All right, thank you. I was writing, I only had 3 slides of constraints, so I'm pretty optimistic there. I'm pretty pumped about that. I used a big font, so it's not that bad. But those are really great things to have those constraints, and you know, we're going to, and I think we all know this, we're going to bump up against a lot of those. We're going to move and consider some management action, and it may have a lot of benefits to it, and then we have this whole pile of constraints on top of it. Doesn't mean those can't be overcome, but it's really important to identify those early. For phase 2, we talked a little bit earlier, we want to split it into a phase 2 and phase 3, primarily one to address these economic questions early, because these are going to require, you know, any kind of, I don't want to call it alternative, that makes it sound like it's not well used and well understood, but the traditional economic models that have been applied in large civil works projects here do not justify, in general, any large sediment management projects to maintain benefits, reduce other impacts, prevent future impacts, anything like that. And so in phase 2, we want to get out in front of that and address a couple of different ways to assess the value of protecting what we have. Now, I understand that in many cases, you know, everybody's got a different opinion right now to the value of what we have. For some people, it's 0 because they don't like what we have right now. For some people, it's very, very high, and any change from the status quo seems like a negative, not an economic or a positive in any way. But those are things we're going to have to look at in here. And what I did on phase 2, there's our kind of our focus statement that we had in the earlier slide. Focus on leveraging existing management studies coupled with the application of economic models, costs and benefits associated with sediment management. Understanding there are lots of nuances in there at a very high level. So what I did is I tried to capture from some previous discussions between the MSAC team and ourselves when looking through those actions or tasks that were identified in section 1179A guidance. Again, we're in section 22, so we have flexibility to pick and choose whatever we want, fits our needs. And on each of these, I have the same starting point so that we reinforce this understanding, provide project beneficiaries and other stakeholders to participate in sediment management decisions, that being through this study, right? At the end of the study, a sediment management plan, we would hope would be generally endorsed by the sponsor, knowing that some people might not be 100%. But it's not, the intent here is not to have it be one boilerplate that we just do. The intent of the sediment management plan is to go through and identify different methodologies or strategies and try to, in a way, quantify how they would affect and they would change the system. And more kind of an a la carte system, like ordering off the dollar menu instead of value. If you don't want all of it, let's find certain pieces of it that provide value and look at doing that. And so a couple of these are fairly basic background things. Evaluate the volume of sediment in the reservoir and the impact on storage capacity. Okay, we do that. We've been taking surveys since the 1950s. Dare I say that's the easiest one on the list here. And then evaluate volume of sediment deposit eroding from adjacent river reaches. That's a little trickier. We do have some surveys in the lower part of the Niobrara. Other parts we don't. We have a few ranges on Ponca. We are currently trying to get a full new set of 2019 surveys of the reach post-March. We all know what happened, and we all know that the river system is very different today than it was 90 days ago. Okay? And that does not mean that we're going to talk about using these existing studies. It doesn't mean those existing studies are defunct and not useful at all, because they're still following the same trend. Okay? Now, these extreme events we have might be little blips that make it go a little faster or a little slower, a drought, a flood, whatever. But they don't change the general chronic nature of increasing impacts due to the way the system is now. If we have opportunities to incorporate new data as it comes aboard, we will. Okay, but as we discussed with MSAC before, in an effort to keep costs practical, we're going to, as much as we can, leverage on those models that are already built. And we've got a dredging analysis, cost analysis from 2015. Let's update the economics on that to 2019 dollars. So we would assess, evaluate the volume of sediment deposited from the tributary reaches, assess the economic benefits of all project purposes. That's your first piece of economics. One that the Corps reports on a number of project purposes annually. That's kind of the low-hanging fruit here of getting that number just associated with the project itself. And then here's kind of our first significant wild card: assess the economic impact of previous and future sedimentation. Many of you have seen the work that Dr. Roland Hotchkiss has done, where he's made an effort to compile a summary of things like the cost of moving the village of Niobrara, right? The cost of the easements that have been issued in the valley, the repairs, whether it be federal, state, local, it doesn't matter. It's all costs, it's all impacts. The repairs or modifications to Highway 12. An occurrence here just recently down at Bezoe Creek, emergency repairs on that event. All of those things to try and put some numbers on that. That's in a very simple statement, saying a very complex thing. And we will have to do some thinking about what we can and cannot calculate from that. There's you could go way down in the weeds on that. What is the economic benefit, the economic impact of the degradation below Gavin's Point to the pre-dam fishery, balanced off with the value of the post-dam fishery, balanced off by the value of the reliability of Yankton's water supply, balanced off by the impact to Cedar Knox for a while. One water supply is getting covered up while the other one is having to chase water down lower because it's getting highlighted, right? So that's a significant effort there. And then taking that information to apply what's called life cycle economic model to reservoir management, or consider the benefits to the entire system. For those of you who haven't ever heard of life cycle economic model, it is used most commonly in the world of sustainability, where we consider what costs are appropriate to make a system sustainable. Of course, the wild card is your definition of sustainable might be different than mine, right? So we can spend the next 2 years fighting over what sustainability means, or we'll come to kind of a general consensus agreement and get forward on this, saying that sustainability will generally protect what we have currently, okay? What benefits we get above the lake, below the lake, in the lake, on the Niobrara, whatever we can calculate there. And we assign a value to those. What are those benefits worth today? If the benefits as the system, knowing that likely the benefits may have been higher or lower in the past, and they'll be higher or lower in the future, if they're worth $10 today, and they decline in the future to where they're worth only $1, what expense is justified to maintain the $10 in the future? Okay. Term that is often used with that is intergenerational equity. And Mark brought it up earlier and said, considering the value to your grandkids, what is the value? What dollar amount would you assign to your grandchildren being able to go fishing on the lake? 40 people in here, probably 40 different answers. But I contend there is a value. There is a value that this generation has that we just kind of default think our kids will have and our grandkids will have that they won't. So the idea of life cycle economics is assigning a value, a future value to that, and then adding up all those benefits we are protecting currently and future, and then that would allow us to say, if we're protecting $10 every year, and we want to protect $10 for the next 100 years, then we can justify and should justify spending $3 on sediment management, or in the simple parlance of the BC ratio, $9.99 to protect $10 of benefits.
Is the value negatively impacted by the relatively low population? It's valuable to us, but is it a problem that...
Well, I mean, it certainly is in the fact when you consider items like the benefits of future flood risk reduction, future recreation. Because while it is very locally important, the recreation dollars at Lewis and Clark are not what they are at Lake Shasta in California. Right. So there is that trade-off, and yes, we do have to take into consideration as part of that economic model how many people are benefiting and how many dollars they are benefiting from it. Because we know that a Happy Meal here is still $6, but I was in Honolulu a couple weeks ago, and they're $9.99, right? So it's almost double the price for the same resource. So yeah, that has to be considered. But you go through that, and then we look at that model. It has been applied to a number of other reservoirs globally. It is an economic model used widely in World Bank, developing nation economic analysis of natural resources. Dr. Hotchkiss, strong proponent of it. We work often with Dr. George Annandale, who has written a number of the books on it. So it's not, in the world of sustainability, we're not coming up with some voodoo math here. We are going to approach it from something that is reasonably well established.
I was just going to ask, on the flip side, we talked about how we have a low population, but economically, is there another way of looking at it as to where recreation, for example, to illustrate how that relates to our population? I mean, that those dollars might mean more to us than those bigger areas. That makes sense.
Oh, that's a good point as a relative percentage of the total local economy. That's an interesting note. I'll have to write that down. I cannot speak to that right now about how that relationship works.
Can you say that again, Sandy?
Just, I guess not to look at the low population as being like negative or economically. I mean, the dollar here might mean more to us than it might in a economy where they have a lot more dollars coming into it.
Well, for instance.
A per capita.
So let me see if I can reword that, see what you're saying. Given that it's the lack of, or the low amount of the population in this area relative to another area, you don't want to be penalized by that, essentially.
Right, yeah.
I think is what you're trying to say. Given that if there was $10 million that would only benefit 5,000 people for a project versus $10 million that would benefit 20,000 people, you're thinking that somebody might say, go benefit the 20,000 people instead of the 5,000. That's what you want to avoid, right? Essentially? Yeah, okay. So you want it to be not an efficient solution, but an equitable solution. This is what we would call it, okay. So a more equitable solution.
Yeah,
and not be penalized.
You know, because some of those regional differences are already cooked into the benefits, right? We sell hydropower on the grid here out to the distributors at a very different rate than Bonneville does. You know, now their costs are higher too. So, you know, but some of those regional differences, economic differences, are already reported in some of the benefits that we would report. Because, you know, the calculation for flood risk, flood damage reduction is directly related to the property cost of which it would be flooded.
You tend to have larger property owners in this area. You don't have as many people, but like Bill and Marilyn Sharp, you know, they have, I don't know how many rental properties, or we have 300 acres that's underwater for the second year in a row, and it was underwater in 2011. Prime farmland.
Right. And in that case, I would think you would benefit from the fact that we should not analyze that on a per acre basis, or we're summing all the acres. We're not assigning a specific economic value to you as the landowner. We put 3 million acres underwater at 4 different kinds of 4 different values and all of that. So hopefully something like that where you're talking about property value should take that out.
There's one thing that the Corps does do for a community. And I'm thinking maybe there's an opportunity to write a white paper here to discuss this based on the population difference. With Native American communities, they know that there's a low income. So there are lots of guidance. It's not applicable here per se. But I'm thinking, well, maybe it's a possibility, I'd have to think about it more, to come up with something to get headquarters to think about approaching this issue differently than the normal way that they do. I have no problem like that.
I mean, yeah, we use regional curve values on all kinds of analysis, you know, that take into account the local economies and the like. So
Getting to like specific things like the water system, like Annette's talked about. I mean, there might not be other options, or they're very limited. So how do you quantify that?
Right. Yeah, if there aren't other options, then you know there has to be some premium put on protecting what you have because there is no replacement value. Because you can't replace it, there's nowhere else to get it. So.
And rather than just the local population or lack of it, Sandy, you got to look at the regional draw for this area. You got the #1 destination park in South Dakota over here on the north side of this park.
Right.
So all that's got to be factored in too. We have up to 100,000 hours of fishing pressure on Lewis and Clark in a normal year. You know, high water years, you know, notwithstanding. So even though there's a lack of local population, even Yankton's only like 14,000, 15,000. It's the regional draw that I think we've got to look at that will be impacting these models.
Sure.
There's a lot of money spent out here on sailboating, for instance, you know. So I think we've got angler use data. I don't know if we've got some of those hard figures for the other recreational use data.
I agree, and everything that everyone's bringing up, these to me, being on the hydraulics and sediment side of it, these are the really hard questions, the economic side questions of it. We've got a better handle on the quantity of sediment and the quantity of water and where it goes and the like. But this is going to be a big lift in phase 2 is working with, we've got some really sharp economists that work in planning and we've already got one working with us on understanding and doing all the background on life cycle economics and all of that. So, but that will be a big task, and I think we will find in the end there are some things that we're really comfortable defending our opinions on what things are worth, and others that we may not be, and we'll have to decide how much that matters. Wrap this up here really quickly. Identify sediment management options, just in this phase, just as a general summary of all the ones that are out there. And then identify constraints to implementation. We've already got to start on that. And then assess technical feasibility, identify beneficial uses for sediment. And then through both of these, you'll see this bullet of, identify opportunities and pathways for funding. That's always simmering right there, looking for that opportunity. The intent here, when we said existing management studies, we're planning here to look at flushing, dredging, and retention of sediment before it reaches the lake. Those are 3 technologies we've done a fair amount of work with. We have some good numbers with. Our intention here in phase 2 would be to take those flushing studies, take the dredging studies, and take what we know on the cost estimates and the development of doing bed material capture and extraction. That is a 3rd technology. And since we're much farther down the road on those 3, use those as a way to push this economic model and see where they shake out and see if we get to a point where using or counting all these benefits for now and protecting them into the future, that some sort of action is justified.
Have you looked at options such as like conservation options to prevent some of this sediment from getting in there? And the reason I asked, my name's Dan Cormish, I got here a little bit late, but something we've been doing in the James River Valley for the last decade is finding these highly susceptible areas and targeting them for conservation, CRP practices, tree planting, things like that. Best management practice. I'm the same way. We own 400 acres of river bottom land, but we were losing a lot of it, and we did a buffer strip program, even 50 feet of grass to prevent some of this going in. I guarantee you that's going to be your cheaper option. It's always much more affordable to prevent the sediment from getting in to the basin as opposed to extracting it. And that's something that can be worked on immediately, as you're doing these other studies of removal, that's fine, but
sure.
Every year, the more acres that go into
the road off the banks and certainly we do see that, the Niobrara being the big driver of that, but the Missouri above here, below Fort Randall and all of that. And you probably don't notice a really heavy focus on that. That is, traditionally, we've traditionally had this fairly clear separation between the footprint of the Corps' operations and the footprint of what agencies like NRCS does. Now we have, even since we're to 96, we've had some expanded authorities to work in watersheds and the like. But it does beg the question, does there need to be an expansion and connection with ongoing NRCS activities as part of this, and use that as an assessment of one of the methodologies?
And I can tell you, at least from South Dakota, as NRCS has really gotten away from a lot of with the farm bills that come out, there are very, very few acres that are even available for CRP. anymore. Most of our success that we've worked with is other organizations such as water districts, Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, DENR, and it seems like we've had a lot more success with those as opposed to the NRCS, and that's driven at the federal level.
Right, just by their involvement and the support of their programs and what their goals are, certainly. Interesting. Yeah.
The three methods that you identified aren't necessarily the only ones.
No.
Okay.
No.
That's just basically.
Those are the three that we're farthest down the road on, and those are the three that make most sense for the least dollars invested to apply the economic models to push this forward and ask those questions. Yeah, when we get to phase two, phase three there, we do have a discussion. We want to, once we've got to this point, and we know that somebody will listen on life cycle economics or ways that we can justify taking sediment management, then we expect to do a deeper dive on the environmental plus and minuses, benefits and impacts of any management action, and we would expand into a broader range of methodologies and techniques, because there certainly are more out there than just those three.
To allow for those other variables, would it be possible to include some kind of forecast or foreshadowing, some kind of formula that says these are the things we need to make this work, and not actually identify a specific technology, but kind of the ingredients of the technology that are needed, if that makes sense. We need to move this much at this cost or whatever.
You're speaking in reference to these three methodologies and going.
Just kind of taking it a step further to say, well, if this one didn't quite meet that, what were we missing?
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, so if we push that, if we run the numbers on these three methodologies and they don't quite get there, why didn't they get there? What was the thing that held us back? Where are they not providing enough benefit, or where is the cost too high, or where whatever? What's the hitch that didn't get us a positive number? Yeah, I think that's something that we can look at in that analysis, just in kind of write up. That's not any real additional work. We just look at the numbers and how they shook out and say.
Yeah, and we're really getting a handle on what are the benefits and what are the costs too. A lot of things I've seen over the years, those aren't always done well. Sometimes they miss things.
Yeah, and
include things that they shouldn't.
Yeah, and it literally, in one technology or the other, one methodology or the other, it may come down to how much value you put on a fishing day. And what the state of Nebraska reports and what the state of South Dakota reports for the value of a recreational fishing day on the lake may be different. And if you use South Dakota's numbers, it works. If you use Nebraska's numbers, it doesn't.
And there's different ways that they've used to value recreational resources and stuff. And a lot of studies have been done to give you an idea of the variation is what's the value of a deer to somebody. And I remember studies years ago, it went from anywhere from $600 to like $30,000. So it gives you a big difference of what people and how they evaluate that.
So when I see a dredge on a river, does that mean that everyone around there has gone through this for 20 years already to get that dredge?
Most likely no.
How does it happen?
Dredge on a river, it may be a federal navigation channel. Federal navigation channels have established dredging programs to keep them clear and open.
What if it's not a navigation channel and I see a dredge? What happened?
I have no idea what happened. Something happened.
That's what I wondered.
Something happened to justify some sort of sediment management there. They can be from anything from environmental compliance and pulling out metals, heavy metals that are in the sediment because of a water quality issue. They could be for construction. They could be for, whatever. We as an example, in Kansas City has commercial sand mining on the river. You see a dredge north of Kansas City there. That's not federal, that's not state, that is a private company that has a permit to dredge and pull sand for aggregate and construction materials out of the Missouri River. So there could be 100 different reasons there's a dredge on the river. Either they're taking it because they need it, or there's too much of it, or whatever, or it's not the right amount of stuff. But I don't want to say something general like if there's a dredge on the river, it's been through a certain process, because I would speculate that everyone is different. When we're doing dredging in a reservoir for the goal of regaining storage, I guarantee there has been some sort of economic analysis done that justifies that dredging. For example, John Redmond Reservoir in Kansas, Tulsa District Corps of Engineers. Spent about $4 million dredging volume out of their reservoir, because they in the Kansas Water Office, they have a legal obligation to provide water to the state of Kansas. And so in that case, when you're running low on water, and water is a fairly valuable resource, in most cases you can justify saying, for the next 20 years, if I spend $4 million here, my return on it is $500,000 a year of additional water storage for the next 10 years. So I get $5 million of water storage and I spent $4 million. That one doesn't require any non-traditional economics there. But yeah, so we do dredge. All agencies, state, federal, do a significant amount of dredging, but it's very rarely as simple as just a storage loss. There are other compounding factors, and that's, I think, what we're trying to get at here. What are those other compounding factors that we take credit for benefits to make this work? So, to wrap this up here real quick, and you'll see this on phase 3, cost estimates, schedule are included, and essentially what phase 1 wraps up here is it takes these tasks in phase 2 and it identifies and details out the tasks and what the analysis will be, what the outcome will be, and then it assigns a cost estimate and a schedule to phase 2. And then at the end of phase 2, you have a standalone report. That report will be eventually integrated into the sediment management plan at the end of phase 3 if we get there. Part of the reason to do this is it very well may be that phase 2 is enough to get somebody's office interested to move this forward, or to get an appropriation on an existing authorization to move this over to another project. It may not. But I think this is the goal here is to get a tangible product. One, to show that this is a valuable and reasonable assessment of reservoir sustainability, and two, to show other interested parties that there is huge benefits to looking at this. So I think the next slide is blank.
No.
Not.
Oh, yeah. But looking at these.
But it's these. What we're looking for right now are there, regardless of kind of effort levels or the like, are there any functional gaps you think, hey, you guys, you really need to think about this? And these are very high level topics. I get that, and we'll refine that down and we'll go kind of task by task. But if you got a standalone report that did, summarize these things and did the economic comparison of those 3 methodologies and kind of did a gap assessment of if they don't work out, why not? If they don't flip the switch, is that what we want in a phase 2 report?
We go back, remember when we were discussing what the problem is, and a lot of other things were thrown out. And all those additional things that are going to be incorporated into another problem statement once we hash it out. Think of that and say, what would be an appropriate objective to resolve the problem, is one way to look at it. And these are the ones that Paul put together for the original problem statement. Is there anything else, and do you agree with these? For this phase? In phase 3,
Yeah,
similar.
for whatever your vision of the problem statement is, am I missing anything?
Can you say the question one more time, please?
At the end, if you get a report that, if the sponsor group gets a report that is a standalone report that covers these items, is that a sufficient goal, and is that what we want to accomplish in phase 2? Or is there some sort of analysis we're missing in there?
Once we talk about like short-term and long-term kind of
Right.
approaches, and I mean, that, when you talked about your definition of sustainability, I guess that would come into play there. If you're able to do something, if you're able to dredge 25% instead of 50%.
Yeah, in this context here, and the way these studies have been completed, the goal of any of them was to approach an annual equilibrium, in equals out. Okay. In most cases, globally, when we've done this assessment, very, very rarely is sediment management applied at a reservoir that results in a recapture of already lost storage. I mean, it's pretty expensive to hold what you have, and it gets fantastically expensive to regain what you've lost.
Didn't you say that the new plans coming out all include that? For any reservoirs, I mean, as far as sediment?
Yeah, new designs, right. For any globally, new dams that are being built are including a sustainability plan, and they're building it into the infrastructure, whether that be flushing gates or a bypass area or off-channel storage. There's 100 different ways to do it. Yes, they are including those. Of course, we don't have that. That sustainability, but the way these reports are written is their goal is to, through their analysis, make in equals out. In the cost analysis, it's we took the annual rate of sedimentation and said we need to move 4 million yards a year, and those are, as you might expect, already pretty expensive. We did not go into the analysis of clean out this year plus clean out last year's, So at the rate, we've already been filling it in for 70 years. So if we want to get it all back, we have to remove double the rate for 70 years to get back there.
What is the life?
Gross storage, 125, 150 years.
But when will it cease to be?
Depends on the project purpose. That's if you ask the water supply folks, 10 years. But if you ask the hydropower folks, probably 100, because it's coarse enough sand in there and the fines go through that the delta has to get pretty close to the powerhouse before they cannot generate electricity. So,
but is that taking into effect flooding? Other things.
It's taking into effect the period of record for the past 70 years. So that's a long-term average that includes 2011 and what we had in the 70s.
I could be wrong, but it seems like we keep changing. Like I've heard it was a 1,000-year flood, and then I've heard it was a 500-year flood, and I've had 3 floods since 2011. And there's a lot of damage from the floods.
Sure.
It just seems like that probably affects the numbers more than
it very well could. It very well could. We have not, based on the long-term storage trends of the reservoirs, we have not done a detailed climate change assessment of the variability of the system. We're not actually funded to do that right now. That's not allowed.
We're looking at a very short geologic time. So things probably are gonna change some.
Yeah, they are, right? We're in a very wet cycle right now. I know we will get dry ones, but are we going from wet to dry? Are we going this way or this way or this way? I 100% agree with you, Barry. Yes, things are changing. I mean, stationarity was always a terrible concept. Nothing stays the same forever. But a lot of the system was built that way, right? So we have to take that into account, but I think we'll probably have to take that into account in a qualitative way when we look at, like when we do our general reservoirs in our reservoir database, we add 25% to the sedimentation rate and we subtract 25% to give us, looking out 200, 300 years in the future, a window. And say, look, if sediment load increases by 20%, the life drops this much. If it decreases by 25%, it extends this much. So we'll do that kind of qualitative analysis, but I just want to be upfront that if we're gonna delve deep into downscaling global climate models and applying those to flow frequencies in the watershed, I just described a $6 million study. So
right now, your phase 2 is gonna concentrate on equal in, equal out.
Yeah, that's the maximum goal. That's those 3 studies that, that the analysis is already done. Their goal was in equals out. And the economic analysis and hydraulic analysis that is associated with them, that was the goal of the study, to see whether we could get there.
Okay, so if that doesn't work out, say it doesn't work out that way, is the next step like an acceptable level of decrease?
Yeah, the next step is the question is, if it's not 100%, 50?
Because if that doesn't work, equal in, equal out, eventually that lake's filling in.
Yeah.
That's a given.
Right.
So, then it becomes what's acceptable. Also, then I want to mention quickly your beneficial uses for sediment. Can that be used as an economic model? In other words, if you figure out a way to get that sediment downstream, and all of a sudden the Corps doesn't have to spend millions of dollars if shallow habitat stuff goes forward.
We are essentially, in a broad way, going to consider if we can get sand downstream a replacement for emergent sandbar habitat project below the Missouri River. That's a course assessment, I get that, but we need to get that on the paper and say, federal government has spent this many dollars building sandbars. Yeah. If we can even re-entrain a portion of that, we could significantly decrease it. Now we're not going to be in a scope where we're going to, do 100 different flows and measure 100 different economics, but absolutely, Dr. Hotchkiss brought that up. Said, look, you've got all these projects going on. We should, and that kind of trade-off can't work in a traditional BC model for a project, but it can here. Yeah. So we have thought about that for sure.
Great. Yeah, Paul. One thing I was going back to what this gentleman said back here. One thing that I would propose be included in this phase 2 analysis would be at least some kind of a literature review or something of upland management, CRP, to just get a handle on what's an attainable percentage of reduction. Because it might be an important gap filler. Like if you can only get 50% management economically justified downstream, and I think at the end of the day, it's a suite of potential management measures that are being implemented by potentially other people, not just the Corps of Engineers. And so I think being able to put a roadmap together that kind of tells that story of what can be gained by other options.
Other avenues.
I think that could be in phase 2 versus in phase 3.
Okay. That's an interesting, yeah.
So post those review. I mean, I'm not saying do a bunch of modeling on it. I'm just get an idea of,
Just an order of magnitude assessment of what kind of benefit one maybe has already been realized. We should be able to do that through literature and some basic extrapolations into the future. Because depending on the watershed, the watershed modifications, 10% reduction, 40, 50% reduction, it all has to do with the dynamics of the watershed. One of the perpetual obstacles here on the Niobrara is it's spring fed and it's a sand bed river. So it never runs out of sediment to transport, and it never runs out of base flow to move it with. And there's, how many 100 feet of it left to go? The in-channel delivery of sediment is not something on a watershed level we're going to be able to shut off. So when we have reasonably maximized what we can get, what reduction we can get from overland sources, we've probably run that race as far as we can go, into the point where you get a lot of money spent for very little return there. But that's a good point, Greg. The other thing I thought is, and this was brought up primarily in the historical documents, Sandy, that you put together and sent on. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't Missouri River Institute doing some sort of, they did a lit review type of historical document harvest?
Well, if you're referring to the presentation at the last meeting, we had just, we had consulted with a genealogy researcher, and we just looked for different historical articles.
But I think there's an opportunity maybe there in a short chapter here to build the narrative that this is not a new issue, right? There's these articles going back, early 1900s, post-dam about changes that were being observed. And all of that. And I think that builds a great narrative to where we are today, so we probably need to include some of that.
But that road map idea, I think, is good in that if we can find a sweet spot with dredging or whatever, then what percentage do we need to make up from other methods or conservation? Does the decommissioning cost fit into this anywhere?
It doesn't, in the fact that we don't have a decommissioning cost on this. We would have to, we've done decommissioning cost estimates on, and they've been done on other projects, because we've decommissioned other dams. And we would have to ask Drew if that's something we can look into literature and find out what kind of guidance there is for that methodology of determining that, and see if we can put a number to that one. My hesitation in throwing that up there is because I don't know if that's a 2-day effort or a 2-month, 3-month, 6-month effort. Because I can see that being a highly contentious number, that would drive policy type of thing. And you might get a few disagreements on whether that's, 300 million or 3 billion type of thing.
But you should move this on a little quicker.
Okay, all right. Any other additions that need to go in here? Okay, and you may have a couple after we look at the phase 3 ones. So let me hop over to them. All right, so there's that. Okay, so phase 3, you will see a couple of these that repeat themselves, right? Opportunities for participation. Again, sediment management options is where we're going to expand the portfolio into some of those that may be new or experimental, and do a kind of a basic qualitative assessment of how we think they could be applied here. Technical feasibility, and this is where we start to bring in a deep dive on the environmental impacts of these. We have to do it somewhere, and we were trying to decide, is it a little bit of environmental assessment in the first phase, and a little bit in the second phase, and it made sense to put the economics of those in the first one, and the environmental in the second one, so we can ask those questions early. Again, with any of these methodologies, continuing to look for beneficial uses of sediment. And this one is right out of the guidance. You can tell it was written in Washington. To the maximum extent practicable, use, develop, and demonstrate innovative cost-saving technologies, structural, non-structural designs to manage sediment. This ties back to what Sandy had said about some neat projects we're collaborating with the USGS on some creative ideas. These are so creative that one of the ideas is injecting the delta with liquid nitrogen, which freezes and weighs less than water. So you inject it into sand, and it captures sand in the matrix and freezes. and it floats to the top and you skip it off. Okay, that's crazy, right? That's completely outside the box, but why? It's an actual technology used in other contaminant harvesting systems. So that's, these are the like completely off the wall things that show up in these, but they're pushing us past the traditional, we know the 8 ways to do this type of thing, right? And then at the end, we're compiling this all into a sediment management plan with recommendations of sediment management actions that conserve the greatest benefits. We should probably say, and cause the least impacts in there somewhere, and attempt to establish a sustainable reservoir. So that's the end game there. I want to make clear that those recommendations will be saying that if this methodology was applied, we might expect this kind of result. A rough scale of impact. But because I don't write policy, it's not going to say the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers will do this. Okay, this document in no way obligates the federal government to take any action. That's just the way these things work. But it does give you a sediment management plan to take forward and say, we've done the heavy lift. Look, here's a combination of opportunities or one that even if it's not purely sustainable, if it would justify extending the life of the reservoir, then we may have something there. And of course, with this phase 3 scope, you get the same cost estimate and schedule when we wrap that up. Anything in there, if we get to this point, to this second to last bullet, and we've incorporated all the items in phase 2 and phase 3, what are we missing?
Paul, some of your bullets on phase 3 are exactly the same as they are on phase 2. Is that just a continuation of those?
Yeah, that's intent because, constraints to implementation, right? We may be looking at different methodologies in phase 2 and phase 3, but all of them have constraints. So yeah, there is an intention. Yeah, so we're going to have stakeholder participation. We're going to look for constraints. We're going to look for funding pathways, and we're going to look for beneficial uses. You see all of those in both of them. Those are kind of fundamental assessments of whatever the methodology is. We need to consider that for each one. So
one thing I'm going to draw, this is a little bit of a loose correlation, but I worked on a watershed management study or watershed plan on the Yellowstone River for a good portion of my career when I was project manager, working with a group of conservation districts. And one of the things that they did that I thought was a good supplement to the Corps' report at the end, it ended up being their own product. And I just pose this for food for thought for people, but they basically developed an addendum that was just their own product because it's a little bit tough for the Corps as an agency to do this. They basically decided as an entity that they were going to publish a list of best management practices that they thought people in the watershed ought to implement. Federal government won't take that step. I can tell you that right now. We're not going to do it. But if there's best management practices that people coalesce around, and you wanted to publish it as a kind of corollary document to this document, I think it might be a really powerful thing as a long-term management tool.
And that's something MSAC could do. They could be they've got a distribution system and a website and all of that. And,
I'm not saying you should or you shouldn't. I just throw it out there for food for thought.
It's definitely worth considering for sure.
Great. Yeah. Mentioned earlier was the fact that this reach of the river, Missouri and Niobrara and the 30 degree are congressionally designated as a wild and scenic river, and there are characteristics that are associated with that designation. What you're doing in this project here would have a bearing or an impact on the preservation of that designation and those characteristics. Because if you don't do anything, we're going to end up with, I call it's either called wetlands or a bog, depending on your perspective. And the bog isn't designated anywhere. as-
Well, it's not, yeah, that doesn't
And I
spin
don't
the
mean
budget
disrespect for
cycle.
wetlands, but it's a factor that Congress
Yeah,
has
that's-
imposed on us, I would think, to try to preserve.
That's
the-
interesting. Is there any
Well, how do
feedback
we define
loop?
this? I heard it a couple times, wild and what?
Wild and scenic river.
Yeah, there's a wild and scenic rivers, recreational river, which is a different subset of Wild and Scenic Rivers Act.
And that's in Missouri, or is that?
Yes.
Niobrara?
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
all of them?
Yeah, there's a
Missouri below the dam.
59-mile reach below the dam,
Yeah.
and then there's a 20, help me, 20,
39.
39.
That's the scenic river up above, recreational river down below.
Yeah, scenic above, recreational river below, and then the up one here comes up the Niobrara.
Plus the Niobrara.
Yeah.
And the vertical, okay.
Yeah, so, and
But it should only be.
and I don't know on that, you know, there, yeah, you're right, there are a set of essentially, qualities, right, to that type of
All the things we're
river.
talking about are included
Just,
in that designation. If you can maintain recreation, if you can maintain.
Does Park Service reassess that? Because I'm not sure that certain reaches would meet their designations anymore.
They did when Congress designated.
Right, what was that, 78, I want to say?
More recent than that.
Was it?
Somebody-
But that's an interesting point, we'll make a note of that. Other thoughts on phase 3 or something that, now that you think about it, should have gone into phase 2?
76,
What's that?
1976.
Oh, it's off by 2 years.
Yeah.
How come I know my history better than you, Rick?
You do?
You're both really old.
What do I?
I've got a giant published, printed bound copy of the Wreck River document sitting on my desk in our paperless office.
Does the beneficial uses of sediment, does that kind of sit on its own, or how detailed does that get? Because that's always a question that we've come across.
Right. That we would have to decide how deep we want to go. You know, at this point, we can cite the work the USGS does. We can cite, you know, examples from the Loop River in Nebraska. We can consider and make the statement that in a highly degraded Missouri River at Kansas City, that re-entraining sediments that would end up down there is a beneficial use and all of that. But we could go however far or not far down that rabbit hole as we want to go.
Because I mean, if, like a sediment collector was part of the equation, we need to know if there's some market for it.
Right. And that's, and I, you know, I think the intent here would, to be at least on each one of these technologies with their assigned economics and general discussion of the analysis, is do some sort of, you know, technology by technology. What's the beneficial use in this case? Well, beneficial use for dredging that's disposed of down in the river is habitat building. But it's likely not if we're collecting bed material in the Niobrara, because the economics are never gonna make it viable to truck it down there. So I was kind of considering doing that, you know, kind of case by case with the technologies the methodologies we dive into. So, all right, what's the next slide, Tim?
Are we, at least at this point in time, content with the
And when
objectives
you-
we've seen? It doesn't mean that they're gonna stay that way. It could be modified as we move forward.
When you think of stuff, our goal here with this team is to, and we'll talk about the schedule, but there will be feedback loops here. You know, we're going to have to take a whole new look at this and turn all of these notes into an expanded phase 2 and phase 3 scope, budget, and schedule. And admittedly, it'll be a few weeks, and we'll get that back through Sandy, and it will come out to everyone. And we're hoping to, you know, at least two feedback loops on that. So.
Okay. I think what we should probably give consideration to is the schedule for this. And there's, the last time we did this in the section 22, we're not going to look at each thing, each task. I suppose the best way to start this is to say for phase 1 of finalizing the PMP with tasks 2 and 3, when would you like to have that done is the way to look at it. So 6 months from now, 18 months from now, or whatever. And then look at that for phase 2, when do you want that done? I'm not sure what you want. and then phase 3. And then what we'll do is we'll take those dates and we'll work backwards to have everything done. That's what we did the last time. So you think that might be the best way to pursue it? You're not gonna be able to nail everything down right now. What we need is just broad paint strokes right now to understand and give us an idea of putting this together. And meeting, giving you a product as well. So I guess, when you want phase 1 done, when's a good,
What's realistic?
tomorrow?
Last week, but what's realistic?
Yeah.
And what's reasonable?
Good question. What's reasonable in these days, Paul?
I'm never in the office to write this. I think when we talked about this a couple of months ago, and to be sensitive, there were some concerns about holding this workshop now because there were some folks that wanted to be here that could not. We had, in talking to Brad Thompson, who was here at the last meeting, there is a concern that there's a fairly heavy draw on Section 22 resources requests post-flood, and a lot of those that are in the flood risk management realm. And so we're here now because we want to be on the front end. It's always better to be at the front of the line for money than at the back of it. So we are still aiming to have phase 1 wrapped up at roughly the end of the FY, end of September, early mid-October, and we need to get a rewrite and a scope and budget development in there, and then we need to route it through everybody a couple of times, and the like. So
are you thinking, Paul, we might have our rough draft rewrite done by the end of August and start getting it?
Yeah. That's I think our goal here in the next 4 weeks is to get back to the sponsor team, essentially a draft PMP that includes all the.
By the end of August?
Yeah, but all the phase 2 and phase 3 scoping budget and cost in it. That's roughly 4 weeks from now. That will be set to MSAC and then shared with everybody who cares to comment on it. So if you think of something, after we talked about phase 3 today, and you get home and you go, I should have brought that up. There will absolutely be an opportunity to add that at that first review. We'll ask that if you have really great ideas, get them out early instead of at the very, very last step of review. Which might cause a significant.
I don't know if there's ever such thing as the last step of reviews. Right? With the last
perpetually review, right?
We had all this nailed. We had I guess Marlon's the deputy director of NRD, and yeah, we'll go with this. And then we went to another meeting, and he'd been thinking about it. And he changed a bunch of stuff already. So then we changed that. We went to a wider meeting, and then it changed again. So it's constantly changing. So we understand that.
Is there anything that we can do to make it smoother or go quicker?
In reality, probably not. It's just the way our brains work. We think of things after we talked about it and say, hey, we need to probably do this. That's the world.
What about somebody like me and other people that I'm here representing today that are property holders along the river and stuff? What can we do to help maybe push this along a little bit more? They're kind of rebellious folks, to be honest.
You're kind of what?
They're kind of rebellious folks down there.
Nah, I didn't get that impression at all. I'm a resident. How you work that out, the way I prefer, only because I got other things that I'm working on. I prefer whatever issues you have. I mean, you can send me an email, Paul, or whatever, but I prefer somebody be the focal point where that stuff gets sent to, and then they send it to us. Because I'm not Greg. Greg has over 2,000 emails that he hasn't looked at yet. I try not to get that down.
Right. That's where I'm trying to do too.
Yeah.
Where should we be focusing that?
That's what I think you'd have to.
That's through Sandy is my, yeah.
Yeah, what MSAC's trying to do is create a forum for all the stakeholders to come together and move forward together. We're not trying to make one side of the river more important than the other. We're trying to get everyone together and finding a common ground to move forward.
Right, right. And there's 15 of us right there in one spot.
But I would encourage you too, and I hope I don't speak out of turn, is there, you know, these documents we're reviewing and all this, they're not secret. You know, they're shareable, you know? If there's input, if you want to talk to your neighbors about it, do that. You know, because there's all kinds of, you know, sitting around, the ideas get really good after about 4 beers, right? So share it, talk about it. Maybe someone's got something we just, 4, but yeah, you're either no man. Just some slack there. But no, I want to encourage as things come out from Sandy, there's nothing, you know, this is a work in progress. The sponsor group here, it's where we're getting all our feedback from. So, but we will, you know, all the primary communication, so all 3 of us don't have 90 emails a day. We're going to deal on a direct route with the MSAC folks to keep that clean so we don't miss anything, and so we don't get bombed.
Here's an example of something that happened with this other project, other sections. We had moved this along, and the project management plan was agreed upon, and we moved along. Well, when we sent it out to get signed, they wanted changes to it. So we changed it again and we sent it out. And it's just the way the process works.
And I think to remember too is we're kind of, the stakeholders are driving the process. So even if you're halfway through phase 2 and there's something, boy, we should really look into this.
Yeah. You know, no, this is, it's not fixed, and it happens all the time. We've already done that. We had a flood this spring, changed the whole schedule in Omaha on a couple other projects and stuff. But if we get, and I think honestly there will be, once we get to the end of phase 2, you may not want some of the things in phase 3 that we currently have scoped. You know, you go, you know, now that we've resolved this, that, I don't know, we're spending more money on that.
Well, yeah, and the elephant in the room is after this is costed out, say, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Can we take this out,
Yeah,
take
and
that,
we have to
and
get
make
creative.
adjustments?
You know,
we understand their
you
constraints.
build everything to a budget, right? And we want to make sure, as we all do in our own lives, we get the maximum we can for our dollar, but we'll have to decide what are the most important things to
With
get.
the potential to move forward to an actual project.
And it's maybe a little different than what people are used to in that you'll come and have a public meeting and there's one time for people to comment. But this is, we've requested this assistance.
Yeah, this is much more dynamic than that. It's a lot less cut and dried. And if we think going forward that, you know, we don't, we have a feedback, we're going to scope a certain level of engagement into phase 2 and phase 3. If the sponsor collective does not think that's enough engagement, we'll adjust accordingly. You know, it's dynamic that way.
Sandy, would it be opening a can of worms if MSAC would help put a human face on the cost of sedimentation? You know, because I think that was part of the angst that we heard was from the people in this room that they wanted somebody to understand what they're going through on a human level. You know, and in your story, you know, a face, and you know, these are some of the faces of sedimentation.
We've seen that, especially in the Pacific Northwest, with some of the dam removals and the sediment and the flooding there. That a lot of the sponsors will do, you know, on their website, little interview vignettes with people who are directly affected by whatever the problem is. So, yeah.
Oh, and I'm sorry, you're right, it was 78. Upper Missouri, Montana was 76.
Back to 78, huh?
You're 78, your record is...
Batting 1,000.
You're batting 1,000.
Sometimes you get lucky.
Oh, no, I'm not home. Come on.
You're just talking to, you're lamenting that I'm even here, aren't you?
I'm having a thought here. Well, wait. So if this is phase 1, did you have any idea of when you would want to put a time frame for potential phase 2 and a potential phase 3? And I shouldn't be directing that to you yet. I should be directing it to MSAC and anybody else. And then we'll deal with your workload.
How long is it going to take to approve a rough draft?
What's that?
How long would it take to approve the rough draft?
Well,
to approve it?
well, get it done
a
first.
month, yeah. Now, once we have that updated PMP with all the phase 2 and phase 3 information, does that need to be reapproved?
For what, the PMP, well, he approves
Internally,
it.
it will be, but it needs to be approved by the
By the
stakeholders,
sponsors.
stakeholders first, in terms of, you want their input on the tasks and the durations and level of effort that we are proposing, because some tasks, the level of effort might be a given, but other tasks, we might want to do it in higher level of detail or lesser level of detail, which affects the cost. So we want that input and that feedback.
So we'll put it together, send it out, review it, give us your comments, and once we get to resolving a lot of that stuff, or hopefully all of it, then I'll reroute it again and have Greg just has to sign off on it for the PMP, and then we'll send it to you again, just have somebody sign off. And what that means is, yeah, you agree to this because you helped put it together.
Not just.
We don't own this whole we don't own the process.
A new page or something.
Pardon me?
Well, just, I was already trying to decipher which version I was looking at, the few versions we've had so far.
You should see my computer with my file, electronic file.
But we'll
Yeah,
just,
but it'll have a new date on it.
Yeah, it'll have a fresh date, you know, and.
And I actually
Sure.
started putting amendments or changes on and the date of it.
Yeah.
So we can keep track.
So, yeah, the next one you will see will have a date and my initials on it for a lot of edits.
And the
for phase
PMP is not set in stone, it's a living document. Okay? We're not gonna change it over little things. We'll just move forward. Big things, we'll consider it, update it, and have it rerouted for signature.
as far as the schedule, I think we might need like a couple months at least to get the contributions solidified for the stakeholders before phase 2 starts.
Well, which, for this here, for the end of phase 1?
Right. Use
In
the
between phase 1 and
PMP,
phase
yeah.
2.
The updated PMP is a tool for MSAC to work.
So after here, you want at least 2 months.
For getting money lined up for phase 2.
Yeah. But, okay,
But phase 2 itself,
yeah. Which would actually be accomplishing all the tasks associated with each objective. When,
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is, when would it be beneficial to have that completed? And then moving on to phase 3, doing all that stuff, which is there's a cost and time associated. When would you want that completed? And then looking out, well, if that's a year and a half, 2 years in the future, it gives you X amount of planning time. And us to figure out, is there a way path forward for a project?
Does all of it together have to be less than 3 years? Is that-
no, we don't have any of those restrictions here. So if additional time is required to line it up, yeah, this doesn't fit into any of those 3x3x3
No.
planning issues. This is a completely
Well,
separate
let me
vessel.
rephrase this way. If phase 3 was done, when would you like to have that done to move forward? I know yesterday, but looking forward that you don't have a study. When would you like to have that done, do you think realistically, that you might say, hey, this is a good opportunity to start doing the project if we're able to find a vehicle for that and move forward?
I think there's still a question of how quickly it could move to 1179A possibly. Is that?
Yeah,
Well, how long would the process take,
That's a huge problem.
question, I think. Sooner we get it in the system, maybe?
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have to, in my opinion, we don't have to have this done in order to get it in 1179A. It's just a matter of requesting the money and whether or not it makes it through the appropriations process, both within the administration, and then whether or not Congress decides to amend any of the president's requests, because Congress always has the ability to change those. 21 is probably the more realistic fiscal year goal for 1179 money. I mean, in theory, it could happen in 20, but it would probably have to happen through the work plan process, which I think would be a long shot for a new start. So 21's probably the most realistic near term, or most optimistic near term opportunity to get get money for 1179. I would pose that phase 2 is like a 12 to 18 month effort. I mean, it kind of depends on level of effort, detail and so forth, but there's a fair amount of work that needs to be done in there proposed, or at least is being proposed to be done there from an economic standpoint. And one thing that from a funding standpoint, I would say is if it does span multiple years, we can break up both the federal funding requests and we can break up the sponsors' contributions over time to make it more adaptable too. So
yeah, if it's $10 on each side, but we go across 2 fiscal years, it may be that you only need $5 this year and $5 next year, right? And you don't have to come up with all 10 right now. Right? Just the 5 for the working year.
I guess the question is then, talking about the 1179 for a project, to have justification, you just say, hey, throw this in 1179, but isn't it good to have phase 2 done as
Great to have
evidence?
phase 2 done. Yeah.
I think it would be good to have phase 2.
Not necessarily have phase 3 done, so we can start the process there.
Yeah, from my perspective, when 1179 gets money, if we haven't completed the whole thing, we'll just do the rest of it in 1179.
And we'll use what we've already done as reinforcement and justification. Look, we're already going. It fits all your requirements here.
So phase 2 is 12 to 18 months. I guess we can start with that and work backwards from that. And then this phase 3, either way, whether we start the 1179 process, at least we can put a date in here of how long you think you need for
Probably
that.
a similar
Another 12
block
months,
there.
12 to 18 months,
Yeah.
or 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, because there's less econ, but there's more environmental.
There's more environmental, and that's what
engineering.
probably help in.
And so, yeah, right, yeah, and that'll be a little bit of wild card. There's actually more econ in phase 2 than there is engineering, because between those other studies that have been done, there's already been about $2.5 million of work done in those other analyses.
Even when you get past 3, you still have to pick the technology or the actual construction.
Yeah, you'd have to go into 1179A, you'd have to use whatever document you had as a justification to request. And I wouldn't be surprised that under 1179A, we'd also have to develop a report there.
Oh, will it have to be another FID? Will there be a FID for that?
Well, I don't know if there'd be a federal interest determination, but there would likely have to be some kind of demonstration of feasibility, which hopefully
most of it's already in the
leverage everything that's already completed, boiled down to the specific of what you want to.
And so we may, in more detail, have to write up.
So in phase 2,
essentially
you might have a
feasibility
few,
and the plan,
have a few
implementation
options
plan.
of what we're looking at, or methodology to support what we're going for 1179.
Yeah, I mean,
or technology.
The way I see it, the sediment management plan could include a holistic, like we've talked, holistic strategy for sediment management, which very likely will contain, at least in my mind, actions that the Corps could take and actions that others could take. When we get to 1179, we're going to specifically focus on the actions the Corps is going to take and demonstrate that those are economically justified. But that would leverage all the data we've already developed. But the report would be very focused on this is what the Corps is going to do to manage sediment within this the context of this bigger plan. It's kind of the way I see it.
Yeah, and it may not be a holistic, complete solution. It may be a piece of it that the Corps can execute. We have to be practical that way too.
Are there cap limits 1179?
No, not right now. Even the implementation guidance, I don't think had a limit on it, did it? No.
Is that divisional approval or headquarters approval?
It'll likely be headquarters approval. Now they've powered down approvals for a lot of feasibility studies to the division offices. So there's a chance it could be the division office, but we'll just have to see.
Just to be clear, the amount of power that's generated by the dams in this system, that money doesn't affect your budget at all, does it?
No, we don't see a penny of it.
You don't see a penny of it?
No, Corps gets none of that money
Would it
back.
be, I know we've talked about this.
You still claim it as a benefit.
Yeah, but over the years, we've talked about if this were a business, you would you would run it that way, that you
Right.
would talk
Yeah.
about how much money I generate, and some of it would be kept back for maintenance.
Yeah, the rates would be higher too, was the
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
It goes into the general fund for the federal government treasury.
Oh dear.
There is,
Goes into the slush fund, yeah.
Western Area Power is investing some capital into generator rewinds and some other transformer yard rewiring and some other things. On some of the projects up and down the system, they did some work at Garrison. They're gearing up to do some work at Randall, but it's kind of driven by what they see as the best return on their investments. So, I mean, it's a potential avenue to have a conversation with them about whether or not they would want to be a player. But I don't know that we've had that conversation yet.
You know, I been involved with utilities a long time. A long time ago, utilities, and probably now, they were set at a certain price, being regulated, and anything, even marginal cost, anything above marginal cost, average cost, it was incumbent upon the utilities to use that for capital investment back into that new utility infrastructure, which doesn't happen. They come in, they spend it, they come to the government asking them to bail out. That's something maybe worth exploring too. I'm not sure how dams.
Well, for the benefit of Senator Sass's representative.
What's that?
Well, for the benefit of Senator Sass's representative, I just wanted to raise that because, you know, it's
Now
a
they
problem
know.
all over the country, infrastructure, and
Yeah, you know, it gets, given that utilities are a national monopoly, and it's like, well, okay, but we're not gonna let you charge the highest price you can because we know we need electricity. We'll let you charge this price, but you're gonna charge a customer this, and you're gonna use the difference of that to reinvest back into the grid, say it's electrical grid. And it's something to consider this for future dams.
Future dams.
Or maybe for future dams.
There was a 1178
Future dam
project beneficiaries for the project.
Yeah, that's, I mean, the way that implementation guidance is written in 1179A, that's extremely vague. You know, it says, as part of that, they will determine who are the project beneficiaries, and they will parse the cost of the project by the relative benefit to each beneficiary, which makes you go, you guys have no idea what you're talking about, dude. Just, I mean, and I don't know that we've gone through an exercise in assigning that. And so that is a fair, valid gray area that we don't know where that's going to end up. You know, there has to be some method to say who gets the benefits. Because even in, you know, to be fair, even in 1179A, when it goes to construction, it's still a 50-50 cost share. So it's not, while it's a great step forward.
50-50?
Construction.
Wow.
Okay, I'm gonna avoid the cost estimation, just let you know it will be done.
Yep.
We can't do it here. I guess, what are the action items we want done? Obviously, we know that the P&P will have to be updated. Yep. Anything else? Anything that they need to do, is to you?
I guess I would ask for, I'm gonna go on vacation next week, so there's a little.
What?
Yeah.
They're always on vacation.
Yeah, but that was before I was in Laos.
That was a paid vacation.
We work for Paul.
Yeah, I know. I have somebody who sits in my desk. No, I'm gonna be gone for a week, so I'm gonna get to this in the second and third weeks of August. So I guess the only thing I would ask for from you is any feedback in the next week, if you would route it through Sandy to compile, so that I have any of those hot thoughts that I can get right in when I start rewriting on this in a week, so that we don't miss any of those. Because this is not the last chance there. So, but the sooner I can incorporate those, the better.
Anything else? And I guess we'll notify you when we have the actual funds in our account. I'll just keep you abreast of this. It's just the process. Anything else? You think of Paul, Greg, MSAC, anybody else in the room?
Comments or questions from anyone? Greg?
I think we got a pretty good game plan.
I'm not going to close this yet. I'll let Greg given how we started out, I think we came a long way. I know that it's a fast-paced process that we use here today. I personally like a lot longer time. Because then we can really hash it out, argue, whatever, and come up to what I feel is an actual consensus. Which I think we have one to an extent, and I'm sure there are people out there that aren't completely happy with some stuff. Hence the reason why we will probably keep modifying some of this stuff as we move forward. But overall, how it started out, and we got to the constraints, I realized that you all started understanding what we were doing, because I could tell by the quality of the constraints that were coming out, that we achieved something here today anyways. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Greg to see if he has any comments that he wants to close with.
I guess I would just say, appreciate everybody coming out, opportunity to exchange ideas. One of the reasons, I tell people this quite often, one of the reasons I went from engineering back to planning, not that I didn't love modeling, I did hydraulic modeling, floodplain mapping, hydraulic design, flood control structures. It's because I love doing public meetings. I love going out and talking to people, helping understand what their problems are, what they see on the ground, and then helping them work through how to address those problems. Whether the Corps has a stake in it or not, I'm a straight shooter. I'm going to give you kind of what I think might work for you, whether we have a role in it or not. And that's why PAS is such a powerful tool for us, because we can plan projects that there's no way the Corps of Engineers would ever actually implement this project, but it might work for you. I'm not saying that's the case in this particular instance, but like we did a groundwater study for a community that was getting impacted by groundwater. We never look at communities that have groundwater issues. We look at overbank flooding. That's our mission. So it's pretty flexible in that regard, and so that's a part of the job that I really enjoy, is getting out and meeting people in our basin. No matter what state I go to, everybody's real genuine. Everybody's got strong opinions. From Montana to Wyoming to North Dakota, South Dakota. But I appreciate your patience. Bear with us. It is pretty bureaucratic. We do a lot of federal speak, so if any of that stuff gets confusing, please speak up. I think this is going to be kind of a fun project, an interesting project, painful for the people that have to live it and maybe have to live it for another several years, because it's going to take some time before actually any change gets done. But I'm more encouraged now that we have momentum and we have the right people talking to one another, that something might happen down the road where, it's not like this is, like everybody said, this is not a new problem. Everybody's known that we've had sedimentation issues for decades. But it's always been kind of the other guy's problem. So that's kind of where I'll leave it. I think it'll be kind of a good team. Tim obviously works for me. If you ever have any challenges with him, let me know. If you have any problems with this guy, that won't be news to me. I have a lot of problems with him all the time. No, that's a really good team. We've got a good economist that'll help us research creative things. And one of the reasons why it'll be fun for us is it's the non-traditional approach. Like, we know the traditional approach isn't going to work, so we're looking for every stone we can unearth to try and find an approach. And we have a new authority, 1179A, which opens the door. Like, it isn't completely prescriptive yet as to what you have to do. So we're taking the opportunity to try and shape exactly how that authority gets implemented and what it takes to justify projects under that. Because what we do here, we might be doing the exact same thing 10 years from now at Fort Pierre or at Bismarck, or the Bureau might be doing it at Glendo or Pathfinder or Yellowtail reservoirs. So I mean, it's prevalent all over the country. The sedimentation challenges that different reservoirs and the agencies that operate them are facing. So with that, anything else, Paul, or I'll turn it over to Sandy.
Sandy will mark those things out. Mark.
I just think that going through this, I think we realize the complexities, we didn't realize that forever, but, we're in it together. So, we just look forward to providing feedback and just identifying the hurdles and tackling them one at a time, and I think we'll get there.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Thank you guys for coming along. Certainly. Now that the interstate's open.